Chapter 641, Frenzied Absorption. Cheating? Jiang Xian scratched his head. In a sense, what he did could really be considered as cheating. While the others were using their physical bodies as a bridge to nourish their soul, he was plunging his soul straight into the lake eye and absorbing the spiritual energy directly. This was just like how a retailer's profit margin would be cut should there be an intermediary between them and the manufacturer. But to be fair, he didn't make use of any artifact or weapon, it was all done through his own ability. Thus, it couldn't really be called cheating in the strictest sense. Indeed, cheating. If that's not the case, how could you absorb spiritual energy so quickly? Princess Fei widened her eyes. This? Jiang Xian had no idea how he should reply to that. The matter regarding soul oracles mustn't be made known or things could prove to become troublesome. After a moment of hesitation, Jiang Xian replied, "If I had cheated, surely you should know how I did it. If even a princess from Hongyuan Empire couldn't find a way to cheat, how could I have possibly done so? If you don't believe me, why don't we swap lake eyes? Your lake eye is nearly empty already, who would want to switch with you?" Princess Fei rolled her eyes. "Dream on. You have nearly finished absorbing your lake eye already. If I were to swap with you, what am I supposed to absorb?" "Teacher, I'll swap with you." On the other hand, Luo Qiqi offered her own lake eye to Jiang Xian. She was the strongest among the group who came from the Master Teacher Academy, having reached Cosmos Bridge Realm Pinnacle. Given her cultivation, the effects of the cleansing lake on her were already terribly limited. As such, she was willing to trade it for a chance to see how the other party managed to absorb the spiritual energy from the lake eye so quickly. This? After a moment of hesitation, Jiang Xian nodded. His soul cultivation had only advanced by a small bit before his lake eye started to run low on spiritual energy. He couldn't possibly just wait idly for everyone to be done. Leaving his lake eye, Jiang Xian stepped Luo Qiqi's, and Luo Qiqi stepped into his. "All right, you can start cultivating now. If you can cultivate as fast as before, I'll believe that you didn't cheat." Princess Fei harumphed. This time, she stared at Jiang Xian's lake eye without even blinking. She wanted to make sure the other party didn't put anything into the lake to cheat. "On!" Shaking his head, Jiang Xian's body jolted slightly as his soul was drawn out from his physical body. Even a 6-star soul oracle was unable to see his soul. Needless to say, they couldn't see it either. Hong long long! As he started to cultivate, the spirit-cleansing incense floating on the lake eye began burning down swiftly. In less than 5 minutes, the 3 incense sticks were on the verge of burning out once more. Jiang Xian returned his soul back to his body helplessly. He had thought that things would improve if he changed to another lake eye, but he didn't expect the results to be the same. The lake dried out once more before his soul managed to get much spiritual energy in. The spiritual energy inside was simply too little. How was he supposed to cultivate like that? One should remember that for his soul to improve, he had sucked the entire seed water of the Yinyang Lake dry back then. Frustrated, Jiang Xian raised his head to look at the lady before him. "You saw everything just now, did I cheat?" "This?" Princess Fei fidgeted awkwardly, and her face reddened. "No!" She had cast doubt on the other party's integrity, and yet the other party used his impressive capability to prove her wrong. "What do you expect me to say?" She felt so stifled inside that she could spew blood at any moment. If only she knew that this fellow absorbed spiritual energy so swiftly, she would have never competed with him. Wasn't this just looking for a face slap? It seemed like there was no point continuing this wager, she was already destined to lose. "All right, you should hurry up and cultivate." Seeing that the lady was on the verge of tears, Jiang Xian felt awkward. He waved his hands and said, "There's no need to get anxious now, there's a chance that you might still win." He did promise Xingyuan to allow the other party to win. He couldn't possibly allow the other party to give up as soon as the bet began. "A chance?" Luo Qiqi rolled her eyes. "Who do you think you are fooling? You finished nearly 3 spirit-cleansing incense in 5 minutes, whereas both of our incense have barely burned through the tip. How could Fei win like that?" Surely you could put more sincerity into your consolation. Teacher is right, we should hurry up and cultivate. Let's not waste this opportunity. Even though Luo Qiqi felt frenzied by Zhang Xian's words, she still spoke up to advise her good friend. On! Princess Fair nodded before closing her eyes to cultivate. While she knew that her odds of victory were nearly zero, cultivating here was highly beneficial to the soul, and this was an opportunity not to be wasted. Seeing that her good friend was still in the mood to cultivate, Luo Qiqi heaved a sigh of relief. She shot Zhang Laoshu a glance before shutting her eyes. While the spiritual energy in the lake eye was nearly depleted, given her rate of cultivation, it was still sufficient to last her half a day. Watching as the duo continued cultivating, Zhang Xian rubbed his glabella. If he were to continue using his soul to absorb, this spirit-cleansing incense would surely burn out in less than 1 minute. It was a hard-to-come-by opportunity to enter the cleansing lake. Was he going to walk out of here without gaining anything? After all he had done, he felt like he had made a huge loss. But there was nothing else he could do at the moment. There was no point intentionally slowing his cultivation by absorbing it via his body. What should I do? Frustrated, Zhang Xian was just considering if he should finish absorbing the spiritual energy in the lake eye and leave when a thought suddenly struck him, and his eyes lit up. Right. How did I forget about the Library of Heaven's Path? He had been too busy cultivating that he forgot about it. Placing his finger into the lake, he willed. Flaws! Following which, his head jolted, and a book appeared before him. Master Teacher Continent, Huanyu Empire Cleansing Lakes Lake Eye. It possesses spiritual energy capable of nourishing one's soul and raising one's soul cultivation. Flaws. Number 1, there is too little spiritual energy inside as compared to the water in the lake. If one were to absorb it directly via one's soul, it'll dry up very swiftly. Number 2. Various flaws were listed in the book. Too little spiritual energy as compared to the water in the lake? That's right. The spiritual energy from the lake eye originates from the lake, so if I can absorb the spiritual energy straight from the lake, I won't need to worry about the spiritual energy drying up anymore. Upon seeing the first flaw, Zhang Xian's eyes lit up as he turned his gaze to the lake beside him. The furious surges of energy intersecting one another within the cleansing lake induced fear in those that set their eyes on it, leaving them daring not to approach. In comparison, the lake eye was visibly much calmer. The spiritual energy here seemed much more inviting as compared to the raging ones on the other side. Similar to how a pit dug on a beach would be filled in soon by the waves of the sea, the lake eyes were formed by the spiritual energy from the lake permeating into these depressions. Naturally, the concentration of spiritual energy it contained was as good as a drop within an ocean. If Zhang Xian wanted to absorb more spiritual energy, the massive cleansing lake was his best bet. Just that, given how the cleansing lake was able to even melt a spirit intermediate tier weapon in an instant, it's impossible for me to withstand it as well. While Zhang Xian knew there was plenty of spiritual energy inside the lake, he didn't dare move recklessly, especially with the previous sight still fresh in his mind. That lake actually melted even a spirit intermediate tier weapon. Even though Zhang Xian was confident in the resilience of his body, he knew he couldn't compare up to a weapon of that tier. After a long moment of contemplation, just as Zhang Xian was about to give up, he suddenly slapped his forehead, and his eyes gleamed in excitement. Why am I so foolish? My physical body might not be able to enter the lake, but my soul can. If others were to separate their souls from their bodies, death would be inevitable. However, Zhang Xian was an exception. Having inherited the several dozen millennia heritage of the soul oracles, he could easily separate his soul from his body and have it enter the cleansing lake independently. The searing energy contained within the cleansing lake which melted the spirit intermediate tier weapon previously would prove to be fatal to the souls of other soul oracles. They would be reduced to nothing in an instant. But having cultivated Heaven's Path soul art, the concept of the 5 soul declines didn't apply to Zhang Xian. Thus, his soul would be completely unfazed by the searing energy. Furthermore, given the intangible nature of a soul, the violent energies rampaging in the cleansing lake that would have torn apart nearly anything easily wouldn't pose a threat to his soul. I should give it a try. Having thought things true, Zhang Xian sat cross-legged to maintain a meditation position. Then he drew his soul out of his body. His soul flew through the air all the way to the boundary between land and the lake. After a moment of hesitation, he finally stuck his hand in. Hoo! His hand plunged into the water. I'm completely fine. After confirming that his soul didn't suffer the slightest damage or discomfort, Zhang Xian's eyes gleamed in excitement. He immediately plunged his entire soul into the lake. Tzzzzzzzzzzzzzzzz. The raging currents of the cleansing lake that could melt even a spirit intermediate to weapon was completely ineffective against him. Absorb. Moving to the center of the lake, Zhang Xian sat cross-legged and began to drive the heavens path soul art. Hong long long! Spiritual energy immediately gushed into his soul through various acupoints, raising his cultivation swiftly. Zhang Xian moaned in pleasure. What concentrated spiritual energy! Indeed, when one door closes, another opens. He initially thought that the cleansing lake would be ineffective on him considering how swiftly the spirit-cleansing incense burned down, but to his delight, his soul was actually able to absorb spiritual energy straight from the cleansing lake. The quantity of spiritual energy in the lake I couldn't even start comparing to this. There was no need for Zhang Xian to hold back at all. Right, I should have clone out to absorb some as well, Zhang Xian thought. His clone also had to raise its soul cultivation. Since this was a valuable opportunity, it would be best to have him cultivate here as well. With a thought, Zhang Xian's consciousness connected with the ring, and in the next instant, his clone appeared in the lake eye. To prevent anyone from realizing that there were two Zhang Xians, he swiftly instructed his clone to sneak here. Fortunately, under the cover of the veil of spiritual energy, the two ladies didn't notice anything at all. Given that clone is crafted of 9 hearts lotus, it shouldn't fear the water of this lake. Considering that the material used to craft his clone was a god artifact, it was impossible that the water of the cleansing lake could possibly faze it. But to be safe, he had his clone put his hand in first, and as expected, nothing happened. Come over here! Zhang Xian had his clone move over to where his soul was, and the two sat side by side one another. Let's start cultivating! The clone drew out his soul, and the two souls began to absorb the spiritual energy from the lake. Hong long long! Walala! It was as though 2 gigantic vortices had appeared in the center of the cleansing lake. Spiritual energy flooded in at an insane rate. Jai. 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 As though consuming an immensely nutritious pill, the two souls grew non-stop. From a size equivalent to their physical body, they grew larger and taller. 2 meters, 3 meters, 4 meters. Back then, after consuming the spiritual energy from the seed water of the Yinyang Lake, Zhang Xian's soul grew to 3 meters large. However, this was even more exaggerated. Under the huge influx of spiritual energy, after 4 hours, the two souls had grown to a size of 5 to 6 meters. It could be said that they were no different from giants at this point. Chapter 642, Zhang Xian is dead? But I'm still far from Lu Chang's size. Recalling Lu Chang's mountain-sized soul body, Zhang Xian shook his head. 5 meters was already an astounding size for an ordinary soul oracle, but it was still far from matching up to Lu Chang. I should continue absorbing. Thus, Zhang Xian continued to take in spiritual energy from the cleansing lake. As he picked up his pace, his clone did the same as well. Just like that, another 4 more hours passed. In this period of time, the spiritual energy in the cleansing lake visibly declined as the furious currents and rampaging energies dampened. The spiritual energy in the area has thinned, but I'm just a little way off to reaching 10 meters. The spiritual energy in the air had thinned to the point that it seemed as though it would dry up at any moment. However, seeing that he was nearing his goal, Zhang Xian decided to quicken his pace. He was just a little off from reaching 10 meters. Once he broke this limit, his soul cultivation would reach newer heights. With this breakthrough, he wouldn't be too far off from matching the Lu Chong back then. While Lu Chang's soul was indeed huge, Zhang Xian's soul had been tempered with the Heaven's Path soul art. While Heaven's Path soul art required extremely pure spiritual energy, it also made his soul far stronger than other soul oracles. Hong Long! At that moment, his clone's soul suddenly jolted lightly. The other party had managed to surpass the 10 meters mark. To think that his clone would actually absorb spiritual energy at a rate faster than him. Perplexed as to why one soul could absorb spiritual energy faster than the other despite being the same entity in essence, Zhang Xian lowered his head to take a glance, and the sight he saw immediately rendered him speechless. His clone had his body to absorb spiritual energy from the lake as well. Forged out of a god artifact, the Nine Hearts Lotus, his clone's body wasn't fazed by the violent energies raging throughout the lake. Even though its rate of absorption was significantly slower than its soul, the additional boost from it allowed his clone's soul to cultivate much faster than the main soul. After reaching 10 meters, the soul of his clone grew visibly stronger. At the same time, its rate of absorption was also hiked up a notch. I should speed up as well. Feeling threatened by his clone, Zhang Xian absorbed the spiritual energy from his surroundings with greater tenacity. But no matter how much effort he put into absorbing spiritual energy, he seemed to be gradually slowing down. Lifting his gaze, he realized that a giant vortex had formed around his clone, taking in the spiritual energy around him. It was no wonder his growth was slowing. A qualitative change would be induced in one's soul upon reaching 10 meters. The other party's rate of absorption was at least 3 times faster than him now. Seeing the other party frenziedly absorbing spiritual energy from the cleansing lake as though he wouldn't be content until the lake ran dry, Zhang Xian suddenly felt a surge of rage. He slapped the other party's head and hollered, "What are you doing? Leave some for me!" What the heck was this? Get this clear, you're my clone. Stop being so ungrateful. It's one thing for you to send me flying with a punch, now you're even snatching spiritual energy from me? Where did your sense of shame go? As an upright master teacher, how could I possibly have a shameless clone like you? I slapped. The clone stopped his cultivation indignantly. Zhang Xian had the other party return to his physical body, and then back into the storage ring. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. With no competition, I should be able to break the 10 meters mark easily. Chuckling lightly, Zhang Xian opened up all of the acupoints inside his soul. With his clone no longer vying with him for spiritual energy, he could finally hasten his rate of cultivation. Start! Muttering softly, he began to draw in spiritual energy furiously through his acupoints. Hong Long! The spiritual energy flowing into his soul was swiftly converted into soul energy. At this moment, a violent rumbling suddenly sounded, and the cleansing lake beneath him began to shake violently before eventually bursting apart. Walala! The lake water flooded into the surroundings as though a leaking dam. What happened? Stopping his cultivation, Zhang Xian immediately looked around him to see what was going on, only to see that all of the cultivators had opened their eyes, alarmed by this sudden turn of events. All of them had confused looks on their faces. This is bad. If other people noticed my motionless body, it will be hard to explain the matter. His body was currently lying by itself in the lake eye. At this moment, there was still some spiritual energy mist shielding his body from the eyes of others. However, once the water from the lake ran dry and the mist scattered, he would be exposed before others. Given that everyone had already opened their eyes and that he was the only one cultivating, everyone would surely notice that something was amiss. Outside the cleansing lake, Emperor Yi Wentian and Pavilion Master Wei Jiang were looking over the entire lake from a distance not too far away. Lying in the east of the cleansing lake is the Verdant Mountain, whereas connecting from the west is the Dragon-Scaled River. With the breath of the mountain and river, as well as the accumulation of energy from the earth vein, those that cultivate here will surely find their souls being enhanced, becoming even more resilient. Stroking his beard, Yi Wentian smiled. As the foundation of Huanyu Empire, the effects of the cleansing lake couldn't possibly be just to nourish one's soul. Absorbing the spiritual energy tempered by the earth vein could make one's soul more resilient, and this would be highly beneficial for future cultivation. This was especially beneficial for one's breakthrough to Transcendent Mortal 8 Dan, Ethereal Treading Realm. The term ethereal treading originated from the idea of stepping on the intangible, treating the void as stairs. Using one's soul as an intermediary, one could borrow the strength from the surroundings to allow one's physical body to float in the air for a short period of time. Without a strong soul, not only would one be unable to float in midair, one might even find one's cultivation being capped. Perhaps even reaching Transcendent Mortal 7 Dan Perfect Harmonization Realm would be a huge struggle. While the spiritual energy in the lake eyes was much tamer, it had also been tempered by the furious energies flowing through the river. Absorbing such spiritual energy was much more beneficial than absorbing the plain spiritual energy contained in spirit stones. This was precisely the reason why the cleansing lake was so famous. Indeed! Wei Shi nodded. A huge volcano lies under the cleansing lake, thus drawing in spiritual energy from the world. This spiritual energy would then be tempered by the volcano, thus raising its purity. On top of that, it also imbues a yang attribute to the spiritual energy, granting one the ability to ward off yin energy. Yu Wentian chuckled. Look at the spiritual energy bubbling from the lake, it's as though a pot of boiling water. Only through endless tempering will a gem finally show its glow. This. What is going on? Just as Yu Wentian was commenting on how incredible the cleansing lake was, he suddenly froze, and his voice quivered in shock. Noticing the peculiarity in his companion, Wei Shi quickly turned his head, and what he saw stumped him. It was as though someone had poured a huge bucket of ice water into the bubbling lake water, thus returning it calmness. Swallowing a mouthful of saliva, Wei Shi suggested, "Perhaps it might have been bubbling for too long, and it wants a rest?" Having lived for more than 100 years, he had witnessed the opening of the cleansing lake many times. In fact, he had even once cultivated in it as well. Logically speaking, under the ceaseless clash between the various energies harnessed within the lake water, its bubbling should have never stopped, so why did it suddenly turn stagnant all of the sudden? Impossible! Yu Wentian's face paled. Our ancestors set up a formation around the lake water, and it is powered by the spiritual energy in the lake. If the lake were to turn stagnant, it could only mean that the spiritual energy has been sapped dry. If that's the case, the formation could break down any time now. Hong Long! Before he could finish, the ground suddenly shook, and a huge crack slowly spread across the cleansing lake. Following which, the lake water immediately gushed out frenziedly. It really broke down. Wei Shi felt the sight before him turning dark. The cleansing lake was the greatest treasure of Huanyu Empire. If it were to fall apart, the number of future experts the empire would have would surely sharply decrease, and the entire empire would fall into panic. How did this happen? Everything went as it should. There was no reason why cultivators cultivating in the lake would cause a sharp decrease in spiritual energy in the cleansing lake, thus resulting in instability in the formation. Watching as the water gushed out from the lake rapidly, Emperor Yu Wentian anxiously said, "I'll get 6 princess and the others to evacuate now. Once all of the lake water runs dry, the pressure suppressing the volcano will be released, and this could result in a catastrophe. Wei Shi, you should hurry up and get Guild Leader Wu and the others from the Formation Master Guild over here to fix the formation." The cleansing lake had been regulated by a massive formation to create a balance among the energies from the Verdant Mountain, Dragon-Scaled River, and Earth Vein. However, with the formation breaking apart, the balance that had been suppressing the Earth Vein had been shattered, and as the Earth Vein grew more and more active, there was a good chance that an eruption may occur. Given the massive size of this volcano, no one incapable of flight would be able to escape should an eruption occur, not even a half-saint. Everyone here would surely be reduced to dust. The might of nature is unrivaled. Only a true saint could still stand their ground before it. Anything else would be nothing other than mere ants. It was one thing for him to meet with danger, but if some kind of mishap were to come unto the 6th princess and the others, the entire Huanyu Empire could possibly be destroyed under the wrath of Hongyuan Empire. He thought that by inviting the sixth princess here to train, he could make use of this chance to please the other party and raise Huanyu Empire's status. Who knew that the usually stable cleansing lake would suddenly explode? What the hell was this? Why did cleansing lake simply explode without any warning at all? If he were to know that Zhang Shi was the culprit behind it, he would surely feel extremely stifled inside. All right. I'll go invite them over now. Understanding the severity of this matter, Wei Shi whistled sharply, and an aerial beast immediately flew over. Jumping onto its back, the duo headed straight for the capital. They had to repair the formation as soon as possible to keep the situation in check. Otherwise, with the earth vein becoming more and more active, it was just a matter of time before the volcano erupts. The land in a radius of several hundred kilometers would be flattened, and countless lives would be lost. On the other hand, Emperor Yi Wentian immediately rushed toward where the sixth princess's lake eye was. At this moment, Princess Fair had already awoken from her cultivation. Along with Luo Qiqi, she was staring at a young man in bewilderment. Despite the huge commotion, and the entire cleansing lake being on the verge of exploding, this Zhang Shi was actually still in the midst of his cultivation. How could he possibly keep his composure under such circumstances? If he really was cultivating, they would have admitted it. But the spirit-cleansing incense floating before them was still as long as before. In other words, in the previous 8 hours, this fellow didn't absorb the slightest spiritual energy. But if he wasn't cultivating, what else could he be doing? Zhang Laoshi! Luo Qiqi shouted, unable to hold herself back any longer. No response. Since something happened to the cleansing lake, and I'm unable to beat your record, we'll take this as your victory. Princess Fair harumphed. The other party had already expended 5 spirit-cleansing incense, whereas she wasn't even done with her first one yet. Without a doubt, this bet was her loss. Since I've already admitted defeat, stop putting on an act and come out. But the young man before her remained completely motionless. There was no response whatsoever. What's wrong with him? No matter how foolish they could be, it was certain that something was amiss. I'll take a look. Anxious, Luo Qiqi rushed forward and jumped into Zhang Xian's lake eye. She nudged the other party, but the other party remained completely motionless. Stumped, she instinctively raised her forefinger to the other party's nostril, only to leap in shock. The young man wasn't breathing at all. With trembling lips, Luo Qiqi uttered in horror, He's dead. Chapter 643, Zhang Xian losing his first kiss? Shouldn't the spiritual energy in the lake eye be gentle and safe? How could someone die in here? A person couldn't actually cultivate to death here, could they? He's dead? How is that possible? Princess Fair was also shocked. She had been thinking about how she could win a bet against this unreliable fellow, but never in her dreams did she expect the other party to simply drop dead like that. Let me take a look. She immediately leaped into the lake eye and touched the other party's body. In an instant, her face paled as well. The fellow who was still smug over burning down 5 spirit-cleansing incense 8 hours ago was now as hard as a rock, devoid of his breath and heartbeat. To think that he was actually dead. Even though she didn't bear the slightest goodwill toward this fellow, she was still the other party's maid. How could this fellow die before she could even redeem herself? Was this status going to remain with her for her entire life, unable to be dispelled? It can't be that he fell into this state because he absorbed too much too quickly while trying to win the bet against me? Princess Fair's body trembled, and her face paled at this realization. The fellow had never left the lake eye, and this leaves only one single possibility. In an overly tenacious attempt to emerge victorious in this bet, he absorbed the spiritual energy from the cleansing lake too vigorously, resulting in a fault which eventually killed him. That's a possibility. Luo Qiqi nodded grimly. But if that's the case, there's a high chance it might be a pseudo-death. As a talented apothecary, she knew a fair bit about various medicinal conditions as well. Pseudo-death? Princess Fair was taken aback. Yes. If one were to absorb too much spiritual energy within a period of time, it might result in one's meridians being clogged up, thus obstructing one's blood flow. As a result, one might suffer from asphyxiation, resulting in a state of pseudo-death. However, this kind of death isn't true death. As long as one is treated promptly, one can be saved. I've once read of such a condition on a book. Given that Zhang Shi was still perfectly fine a moment ago, this is very likely to be the situation, Luo Qiqi said. Then, do you how to save him? Princess Fei asked worriedly. Frowning, Luo Qiqi contemplated for a moment before replying. If I recall correctly, we need to remove the spiritual energy from his body in one swift stroke. In one swift stroke? Princess Fei couldn't understand the intent behind these words. His meridians are currently bloated with spiritual energy, thus putting them under high strain. If we were to remove the spiritual energy from his body using traditional palm-to-palm method, it might cause a pressure difference in the spiritual energy in his body, and this could potentially result in his meridians rupturing. If this were to happen, it could complicate matters and make it even harder to save him. Even if we were to save him from such a condition by chance, he would be crippled for life. Thus, we have to remove the spiritual energy from his body in one swift stroke. At this point, Luo Qiqi's face suddenly reddened. In other words, we need to remove spiritual energy from his body mouth to mouth. Mouth to mouth? Princess Fei's face twitched. Removing the spiritual energy from the other party's body palm to palm would indeed be inefficient, and a failure to maintain an apt pressure difference in the body could easily cause his meridians to rupture, given the feeble state it was in. Should his meridians rupture entirely, his life as a cultivator would be over. But they were of different gender. To remove spiritual energy mouth to mouth. With a face scarlet in embarrassment, Princess Fei urged. Since he's your teacher, you should hurry up and save him. Me? Luo Qiqi shook her head swiftly. The relationship between a teacher and student is sacred. This is a little too intimate. I cannot sully this relationship with this. Rather, aren't you intent on beating him in a bet? If he were to die, you'd have to carry the name of being his maid for your entire life. This? Princess Fei's face paled. The other party had struck right at her vitals. This was exactly what she felt the most conflicted about. Given that she had lost the bet, she would remain as the other party's maid. If this fellow were to die here, this shame would follow her for life. Others might even think that she had killed him out of rage from losing. She could never cleanse her reputation were that to happen. What the heck was this? Just a mere bet, and she suddenly became responsible for the other party's life. The thought of it left her incredibly stifled. Seeing that her good friend was still hesitating at this point, Luo Qiqi urged her again. You should hurry up if you want to save him. The longer you delay, the lower the possibility of him being resuscitated. Conflicted, Princess Fei contemplated for a short moment before gritting her teeth. Fine, I'll save him. She had always been doted upon ever since she could remember, and never had she suffered such a huge humiliation. Not only did this fellow beat her in a bet, he even made her his maid and left her bottom swollen with a kick, leaving her nearly unable to walk. She was furious, but what she wanted to do was to beat him fair and square. If he were to die, how could she get even with him? This regret would follow her for life. Before this, the gender difference seemed less significant in comparison. Gritting her teeth tightly, she drove her Jinqi and slowly approached the other party's mouth. What are you doing? Zhang Xian, who had just rushed over from the cleansing lake, happened to arrive on the scene at this moment, and he nearly fainted from the sight. Due to the rapid growth of his soul, his control over it was lacking. Thus, to prevent anyone from noticing his soul, he had traveled underwater, and as such, he wasn't aware of what was happening above. Just as he was about to re-enter his physical body, he saw the sixth princess holding his body, ready to kiss him, and he nearly died of shock. The sixth princess looked normal on the surface, and yet as soon as he was gone, she actually tried to kiss him. Indeed, you can't judge a book by its cover. Stifled, he was just about to push the other party apart when an anxious voice sounded. Sixth princess! At that crucial moment, Xing Yuan arrived on the scene. While he feigned calmness on the surface, his heart was crumbling within. He had spent so many years wooing the sixth princess, only to be ignored and snubbed. Yet, the other party was now taking the initiative to kiss a fellow who nearly angered her to death a few days ago. What was with this crazy twist? Ah? Xing Yuan, you came at the perfect timing! Upon seeing that fellow, Princess Fei blushed in embarrassment. At the same time, she also heaved a sigh of relief. She quickly beckoned the other party over. Hurry, come and save him! Save him? Xing Yuan was taken aback. That's right. There isn't much time to explain the matter in detail, but to save him, it would require one to draw the spiritual energy in his body out in a single breath through mouth-to-mouth contact. Hurry up or else he'll die. Princess Fei rushed the other party. Mouth-to-mouth contact? Xing Yuan's body swayed weakly. Me and him? On the other hand, Zhang Xian's sight also darkened. While I might not show too much interest in ladies, this doesn't mean that I'm interested in guys. If I were to really be kissed by him, wouldn't I die of disgust? Indeed, hurry up. Otherwise, we won't make it in time. Princess Fei nodded. Zhang Xian was about to puke blood. On the other hand, Xing Yuan was also on the verge of a mental breakdown. Seeing the conflicted expression on the other party's face, Princess Fei said, If you won't, I'll do it. Xing Yuan clenched his jaws and replied, Never mind, I'll do it. He would rather sacrifice himself than see his goddess's lips stolen by another man. Thus, he leaped into the lake eye, held Zhang Xian's body in his grasp, and his lips began to approach the latter's. The heck! Zhang Xian was on the verge of crying. No, I must return to my physical body now. Otherwise, I'll lose my first kiss to a man. At this moment, he couldn't care any longer. His soul immediately rushed straight toward his physical body. As long as his soul entered his physical body, his body would regain its consciousness, and he would be able to salvage the situation before him. But Zhang Xian's soul came into contact with his glabella. He suddenly stiffened. Due to his soul growing far too much in this round of cultivation, reaching a level beyond the tolerable limit for his physical body, he actually found himself unable to re-enter his body. To put it simply, his soul was too big for his physical body, causing him to be unable to squeeze back into his body. But that fellow's lips were on the verge of touching his already. I can't care anymore. Seeing that the two lips were about to meet, Zhang Xian couldn't hold it back anymore. Gathering his soul energy, he sent a kick at the other party. While a soul may be intangible, it could materialize soul energy to fight with another. Pun! Not expecting that someone would attack him, Xing Yuan didn't even have the time to react before he was kicked in the face. With an anguished shout, he was sent flying into the cleansing lake. Save me! Xing Yuan screamed in desperation. He thought that, just like the spirit intermediate to weapon, he would melt into goo upon falling into the water. But after shouting for a little longer, he realized that he was perfectly fine, and his face began to slowly flush. As the spiritual energy in the cleansing lake had been sapped dry, it had lost its violent nature and its corrosive ability as well. Let alone him, even an ordinary human would be fine in there now. It could be said that the cleansing lake was no different from an ordinary pool of water at this moment. What are you trying to do? Princess Fei's face was as dark and cold as the middle of winter. She had thought that this fellow would be able to save Zhang Shi swiftly, but who knew that before he would end up jumping here and there, screaming and shouting? What was he up to? Did he suffer a stroke? While an attack comprising soul energy might be intangible, they, as 5-star master teachers, should be able to notice that something was amiss if they were to pay closer attention. However, with everyone's attention on saving Zhang Shi, no one noticed anything at all. If you don't wish to save him, just say so. There's no need to put on such an elaborate act. Not even waiting for the other party to explain himself, Princess Fei stomped forward angrily. There was clearly nothing there at all, and yet this fellow leaped backward all of the sudden. It was clear that he didn't wish to save the other party. If he didn't want to do so, he should have said so earlier. This delay had robbed them of precious time. Xing Yuan nearly burst into tears. Can't you see this huge footprint on my face? However, Princess Fair couldn't be bothered with him anymore. Puckering her lips, she began moving her face closer to Zhang Xian's. 6 Princess, Xing Yuan Gongzi, Luo Qiqi Xiaojie, this is. Before her lips could come into contact, a shocked voice sounded. Lifting their gaze, they saw Emperor Yu Wentian standing before them. Yu Wentian was also completely stumped by the situation before him. He was going to evacuate the 6th princess, and the others out of the lake eyes as soon as possible when he stumbled upon such a scene. While he was feeling extremely awkward, he couldn't help but sigh. Youngsters nowadays are getting more and more liberal. Even in the middle of the day, in a public pool, they would do such stuff. Upon seeing Yu Wentian, Princess Fair heaved a sigh of relief and said, "You came at the perfect time. Something has gone wrong with Zhang Shi's cultivation, so take a look quickly and see if you have any ideas on how he can be saved." The other party was a transcendent mortal 8-dan pinnacle expert, as well as the emperor of a country. In terms of eye of discernment and scope of knowledge, he was surely far above Luo Qiqi. Perhaps he might have a better idea than mouth to mouth. Something has gone wrong with Zhang Shi's cultivation? Yu Wentian was taken aback for a moment before redness slowly crept across his face. He thought that the duo was giving in to their carnal needs, but it turned out that something bad had happened. Following which, his eyebrows slowly came together to form a tight frown. This young man was in existence that could potentially become a combat master in the future. More importantly, he was also a person protected by Pavilion Master Mo of Hengyuan Empire. If something were to happen to him, he could probably retire from his position as the emperor. Leaping into the lake eye, he walked up to Zhang Xian, took a look, and frowned. Seeing the grim expression on the other party's face, Princess Fair asked nervously, "What's wrong? It seems like..." Yu Wentian's eyes were widened, as though he could hardly believe what he was seeing. "His soul has left his body." Chapter 644, Crawling Back In. His soul has left his body. Princess Fair, Luo Qiqi, and the others were stunned. Such an issue was also known as missing soul, and it was one of the most feared things of a cultivator. If one's soul fails to return back to its body, the body would turn into an empty shell and die. However, for one's soul to leave its body, it must be sufficiently strong first. One must be at least consonant spirit realm pinnacle, or even cosmos bridge realm to achieve that. How could such a situation occur on a clarifying turbidity realm cultivator? Yu Wentian spoke grimly. There are many causes for a soul leaving the body. For example, one's soul could be attracted by some kind of unique formation or fail to suppress one's inner demons. Zhang Shi might have used a secret art beyond his means to cultivate his soul, resulting in such a situation. If we don't quickly return his soul to his body, he might really die soon. While soul oracles were the most adept at it, they weren't the only ones capable of drawing their souls out of their bodies. There were some formidable formations or secret arts that could achieve the same effect as well. Is there a cure for it? Luo Qiqi asked anxiously. This young man was her apothecary teacher, and she couldn't watch as the other party died because of this. There's indeed a cure. However, it's extremely troublesome, and there isn't any time for it now. Turning to look at the cleansing lake, which was being drained at an astounding rate, Yu Wentian frowned. The steps to summoning one's soul were extremely complex and troublesome. Without several hours or even days of effort, it would be difficult for him to succeed. However, given that they were just moments away from the water and the cleansing lake running dry, and a volcano eruption was imminent, time simply wasn't on their side. Then what should we do? Pull him up first. Knowing that this wasn't the place to speak, Yu Wentian picked Zhang Xian's body up and leaped ashore. Watching as his physical body was being carried away, Zhang Xian's massive soul was on the verge of tears. Are you all trying to save me or kill me? After a moment of hesitation, Zhang Xian decided against following his body. While it would have been difficult for my soul to enter like that, with sufficient time, I could still have succeeded. However, you actually allowed Yu Wentian to take my body away. If my soul were to try to enter my body now, Yu Wentian might just try to dissipate my soul, thinking that I'm just a specter. I can only wait for a chance to snatch my body back. While a soul formed via Heaven's Path soul art didn't carry a heavy aura, thus making it hard for one to sense it, there was still a good chance that he would be noticed if he were to run right up to the other party's face. This was especially so given that Yu Wentian was a transcendent mortal 8-Dan pinnacle expert. If he tried to creep up on the other party, he might just be killed before he could even identify himself. Besides, even if he were to report his identity to the latter, he had to win the latter's trust first. A clarifying turbidity realm cultivator possessing a 10-meter large soul that could leave its body and cultivate individually. How was he supposed to explain all of that? Thus, the best course of action he could do now was to remain hidden. As long as he could find a suitable opportunity to dive back into his physical body, everything would be solved. At the very most, he could just blame it on his anxiety to accomplish greater heights that resulted in his erring. While Zhang Xian's soul was still camping in the water, waiting for a suitable moment to strike, Yu Wentian had already carried his body over to the courtyard where they were previously. Seeing that the other party was completely motionless, Hong Shi, Luo Shi, and the others immediately rushed up anxiously and asked, "How is Zhang Shi?" "Most probably, his soul has left his body," Yu Wentian said with a grim voice. "His soul has left his body." Hong Shi's face paled as his body shook in agitation. How could that be? Zhang Shi's teacher was an incredibly powerful existence that could possibly be an 8-star master teacher. To actually cause his student to lose his soul. If he were to learn of it, not only Huanyu Empire, perhaps even the entire Hongyuan Empire would be a goner. If I'm not mistaken, it could be due to the sudden agitation of the cleansing lake in the midst of his cultivation that caused his soul to be jolted away, thus leaving behind this empty shell, Yu Wentian said. This was the only explanation he could think of. Otherwise, how could others be fine while he was in such a state? It must be due to the abrupt change in the lake that jolted his soul out of his body. If his soul was still intact after the impact, it would still be possible to find him. However, if his soul were to have dissipated, it would be extremely difficult to save him. This? With a pale face, Hong Shi was just about to ask if Zhang Shi could be healed when the ground suddenly shook. A searing aura suddenly burst forth from the center of the lake. This is bad. The volcano is about to erupt. Yu Wentian's face immediately warped in shock. He quickly placed Zhang Xian's corpse down on a stone table and turned his side over. The situation at the cleansing lake also caught the attention of others. At this moment, the lake water was bubbling violently. Searing heatwaves flowed into the surroundings, and the ground shook non-stop. It was as if a massive savage beast was rampaging beneath the ground, threatening to leap out at any moment to slaughter them all. What's going on? Feeling the shaking intensify, everyone frowned. I think it's about to reach its limit. Clenching his fists tightly, Yu Wentian's face was turning paler by the moment. He thought that even though the formation was breached, given how many years that the cleansing lake had been maintained for, it should be able to suppress the volcano for another few more hours. Who knew that everything would unfold so quickly? If everything were to go down at this rate, in less than 10 minutes, the rampaging energy contained in the volcano and the earth vein would come gushing out. Yi Qian, quickly take 6 princess and the others away. Yu Wentian turned around and quickly instructed. As the emperor, he couldn't leave the scene. However, nothing bad must happen onto the 6th princess and the others. All right. Yi Qian also understood the severity of the incident, and he rushed forward to Princess Feier. 6th princess and Senior Xingyuan, the cleansing lake isn't going to hold on for much longer, and an eruption is imminent. This area is dangerous, so allow me to bring you to a safer location. All right. Xingyuan nodded, and he quickly turned around to beckon Princess Feier to leave as well. However, the latter simply looked at Yi Qian with a frown and said, Since this fellow's soul isn't in his body, does that mean that his soul is currently in the cleansing lake? This? Yi Qian was taken aback. That should be the case. Then what should we do? If we don't find his soul and deliver it back to his body, he really will die, Princess Fair said anxiously. Don't worry, I'll have my men look for it. Senior, you should hurry up and make use of the little time we have left to leave, Yi Qian reassured. On. Nodding her head, Princess Fair turned to her good friend and said, Let's go first. The reason why she wanted to save Zhang Xian was because she couldn't bear the shame of being the other party's maid for her entire life. Since the other party's soul had escaped from his body, there was nothing else she could do. Even if she were to remain here, she would be completely useless. Thus, she decided to simply leave. Luo Qiqi shook her head. You go first. I'm indebted to Zhang Laoshe, and given that his life and death is uncertain at the moment, I really cannot leave at this moment. Zhang Shi had once taught her pill forging, thus inducing huge growth in her pill forging skills, and above all, she had already acknowledged the other party as her teacher. How could she leave on her own now that the other party was in a coma? She couldn't bring herself to do so. Since you aren't leaving, I'll stay here too. I'm also interested to see what is happening to the cleansing lake. Seeing her good friend refusing to leave, Princess Fair decided to remain here as well. Ah! Hearing that the duo had decided to remain here, Yi Qian nearly went insane on the spot. Just as he was racking his brains to find a way to persuade the two obstinate ladies, a gust of wind suddenly howled above them, and a massive aerial spirit beast appeared before the crowd. Hoo hoo hoo! A few figures leaped down from the sky. Taking a closer look at the men falling from the sky, Yi Qian's eyes lit up. It's Wei Shi, and Guild Leader Wu from the Formation Master Guild! He knew about the secret of the cleansing lake as well, and this situation was clearly due to the energies in the lake being in imbalance, resulting in the collapse of the formation. As a 5-star Pinnacle Formation Master, Guild Leader Wu might be able to find a way to reverse the situation. How did this happen? Reaching the ground, Guild Leader Wu looked around him and saw the lake water flowing into the surroundings, and the ground trembling violently, as though it would collapse under them at any moment. He frowned. The Huanyu Empire royal family would invite him over each year to reinforce the formation, so he knew a great deal about the formation as well. If it was just cultivating in the lake it should be impossible for such a situation to occur, then why was everything crumbling now? I don't know the exact reason, but now isn't the time to be talking about this. Guild Leader Wu, hurry up and see if there's a way to salvage the formation so as to stop the volcano below from erupting. Yu Wentian instructed anxiously. Nothing would change even if they were to point fingers now. The urgent matter at hand was to see if there was a way to salvage the situation. Otherwise, none of them here would survive this ordeal. On! Knowing the severity of the matter, Guild Leader Wu nodded. He turned his sight over to the lake. Elder Lu, you will take the Ken position. Elder Han, you will take the Gen position. After assessing the situation, he quickly issued orders to the other elders who came with him. The few elders nodded and quickly got into their respective positions. Then, they each took out a formation flag and stabbed it deeply into the ground. Hong Long! As soon as all of the formation flags got in place, the spilling lake water was suddenly held in place, as though it was being sealed by something. However, it was as if sealing a rampaging dragon. The ground tremored more and more violently, like it would tear past whatever that was restraining it to burst forth. This isn't right. Guild Leader Wu frowned. Emperor Yu Wentian walked up to the group and asked, What's wrong? Located precisely at the intersection of the Verdant Mountain, Dragon-Scaled River, and the Earth Vein, the cleansing lake should be rich in spiritual energy. The formation set up here tapped into the concentrated pool of spiritual energy here to suppress the violent energies from the three sides at this intersection. How come there's no spiritual energy here now? Guild Leader Wu was astonished. No spiritual energy here? Yu Wentian froze. He closed his eyes and tried perceiving the surroundings carefully, and he realized that something was indeed amiss. Just a few hours ago, the spiritual energy here was so powerful that even a transcendent mortal 8-Dan expert would be slaughtered easily if he were to enter the lake. How could it disappear so abruptly? Indeed. Guild Leader Wu nodded. He was just about to speak when someone behind him shrieked. Hearing the voice, Yu Wentian quickly turned around to see what was going on. He immediately saw Luo Qiqi and the sixth princess staring doubtfully at the master teacher known as Luo Xian. "Where's Zhang Laoshi?" On the stone table right before them, Zhang Shi's corpse had disappeared without a trace. He. Hearing the other party's questions, Luo Xian's mouth quivered uncontrollably. His eyes were widened, and he looked as though he was about to cry at any moment. He pointed at the lake not too far away and said, "He was still lying there a moment back, and in the moment that my attention was somewhere else, he crawled back into the lake." Chapter 645, Physical Body Too Weak. He crawled back in himself? Everyone stared at one another in bewilderment, as though someone had struck the back of their heads with a wooden bat. "Do you take me for a fool? His soul has left his body, and he's no different from a corpse now. How could he possibly crawl back into the cleansing lake himself?" Princess Fei glared at Luo Xian angrily. "Even if you wish to scare us, you should find a more believable story. I took a look at Zhang Shi myself, and his heartbeat and breathing had halted, and his body was stiff and cold. He was no different from a corpse. Under such circumstances, how could his body possibly crawl back into the lake by itself?" Yu Wentian, Hong Shi, and the others shared the same thoughts as well. They turned to look at Luo Xian, wanting to hear his explanation. "I'm not lying!" Seeing how everyone was staring at him as though he was a lunatic, Luo Xian found himself on the verge of really going insane. The commotion caused by the cleansing lake previously was too large, and everyone's attention was captured by it. He was no exception as well. However, at that moment, he saw a black shadow in his peripheral vision. It was from the corpse-like Zhang Xian. Somehow, the fellow seemed to have found a surge of strength within him. Through pushing his hands against the ground, that fellow swiftly crawled toward the lake. Everything happened so quickly that Luo Xian barely saw a gray blur. Seeing the incredibly stifled expression on the other party's face, Luo Qiqi asked, "Calm down, how did he crawl into the cleansing lake? Did he wake up, or was he still in his previous state?" His eyes were still closed, and his body was still stiff and lifeless. It didn't seem like he had woken up at all. Even though it was just a momentary glance, as a half-5-star master teacher, Luo Xian was still able to notice some details regarding the incident. While that fellow did move, his movements looked like a puppet on a string that was being drawn forward instead. But of course, that was also the limit of his eye of discernment. His body was stiff, and his eyes were closed, and he crawled to the cleansing lake by himself? Princess Fei frowned. "You mean that he has been possessed?" Cough, cough. Yu Wentian choked on his own saliva. "Zhang Shi's soul has only escaped his body, he isn't truly dead yet, so it is impossible for him to be possessed." "Then, what was with him crawling away by himself?" Hong Shi asked. Among those present at that moment, only he and Luo Xian knew that Zhang Xian was the direct disciple of an 8-star master teacher. Even though Bai Jiahai had participated in the Hongfeng Empire Master Teacher Tournament as well, he wasn't present for the affairs that night, so he wasn't too sure about the details. If Yang Shi were to learn that on top of having his soul missing, his disciple had his body possessed as well. Hong Shi trembled. "I'm not too sure either." Yu Wentian shook his head. He had never stumbled before such a bizarre incident in his life before. Hong Long! Just as everyone was completely perplexed by how a fellow who had his soul missing could possibly crawl away, the ground suddenly shook violent once more. Everyone immediately staggered, nearly falling to the ground. "We're in a dire state now. The strength of the earth vein is growing by the moment, and the formation is on the brink of collapse. Everyone, we need you to infuse your Jinqi into the lake to maintain its stability." Guild leader Wu yelled anxiously. Hearing the shout, no one could spare a single thought for Zhang Xian anymore. They quickly turned their attention to the formation before them. The lake water which had been sealed by the formation flag bubbled once more. As though it was set on fire, it threatened to knock down the barrier. In order to stabilize the barrier, Elder Lu, Elder Han, and the others had infused all of their Jinqi in, and their faces paled in frailty. They seemed as though they would collapse at any moment. "All right, quickly infuse your Junqi into the lake." Hearing his words, Yi Wentian understood that they were at an extremely crucial and dangerous moment. Thus, without any hesitation, he stepped forward and pumped his Junqi into the lake. Hong Long! With the infusion of fresh Junqi into the lake, the shaking formation flag stabilized slightly. Following which, Wei Shi, Hong Shi, Luo Qiqi, Princess Fair, and the others who were cultivating at the lake stepped forward and did the same as well. Under the massive influx of Junqi, the shaking formation flag began to show signs of stabilization. The rampaging lake water below also gradually regained its calmness. Even so, the furious rumbling of the volcano could still be heard below. It was as if even though the massive beast had been suppressed for the time being, it would still break free with sufficient time. "Guild leader Wu, such a forceful measure isn't feasible in the long run," Wei Shi commented. For the time being, they were still able to maintain the formation and suppress the earth vein and the volcano with brute force. But once everyone's Junqi ran dry, the situation could possibly rebound on them. Besides, as time passed, the earth vein would gather more and more strength. In a way, it was similar to a spring. The further one tried to suppress it, the greater it would rebound back at one. By then, they would be placed in an even more dangerous situation. "Indeed. You all continue suppressing the formation first. I'll study the formation and see how I can re-establish the balance between the earth vein, verdant mountain, and dragon-scaled river to control the volcano below," Guild leader Wu said. The might of a formation was dependent on many factors, such as the geographical terrain, or even the position of celestial bodies. While the formation had been reactivated through the use of the formation flag, the intense trembling from a moment ago had changed the geographical terrain. Thus, some adjustments had to be made to the formation to bring out its greatest might. If he could get the formation working properly once more, it would be able to draw in spiritual energy once more and possibly resolve the crisis they were in. "All right." Understanding the intent of Guild leader Wu, Yi Wentian, Wei Shi, and the others nodded their heads silently. Spreading their palms wide, they continued to infuse their Junqi into the lake frenziedly so as to suppress any movement from the volcano. On the other hand, with a compass in hand, Guild leader Wu slowly walked around the formation in order to find the layout to best bring out the might of the formation. While a tense atmosphere weighed on the shore, within the lake, Zhang Xian's soul heaved a sigh of relief. It was fortunate that an abrupt movement in the lake had caught everyone's attention. Otherwise, it would never have been so easy for him to take back his body. As his soul was simply too big, he wasn't able to slip in instantly. Thus, he could only forcefully control parts of his body to have it walk over by itself. His original thought was to move his legs, but due to the extreme stiffness in the region and the immense complexity of making his body walk, he had to give up on the idea. Thus, he had no choice but to move his arms and have his body crawl into the lake. However, Luo Xian coincidentally caught sight of him, thus resulting in the possession issue. "Regardless, I should first have my soul enter my body first." Zhang Xian could easily imagine the uproar that was happening outside, but he didn't have the luxury to be thinking about it now. His soul immediately rushed straight to his glabella in an attempt to enter his body. No matter how difficult it may be, he had to do so. Otherwise, his body might just really die on him. Tzzzzzzz. His massive soul trying to squeeze into his physical body was similar to an elephant trying to squeeze into a human-sized door. "I can't get in." Zhang Xian gave it all his might, but it was simply an impossible feat. He couldn't help but shake his head. A 10-meter-tall soul forcefully entering a body of 1.8 meters. If not for his soul being intangible, his bones would probably have shattered into countless fragments by now. His soul was squeezed to the extent that it was distorted scarily, but he still couldn't even get half of it in. "Right, how did Clone manage to get into his body so easily then?" Zhang Xian suddenly froze. His clone's soul was much larger than him, but the other party didn't have any problems entering his body at all. Why was he having so much trouble then? Who? Doubtful, Zhang Xian brought out his clone and communicated with him. Soon, he found himself being rendered speechless. His clone's body was forged using the 9 Hearts Lotus, granting it extraordinary flexibility. Putting aside a 10-meter-tall soul, even a 100-meter-tall soul would be able to slip in easily without any trouble. On the other hand, his main body was still mortal. Staring at the clone, Jiang Xian couldn't help but feel frustrated at how his main body ended up being inferior to his clone's. But this couldn't be helped. Anything forged from a god artifact was bound to be extraordinary at birth. It seems like I have to focus my attention on cultivating my physical body when I finally get back into my body. Otherwise, it won't be able to withstand the further cultivation of my soul. Jiang Xian rubbed his glabella. After communicating with his clone, Jiang Xian finally understood that the main reason why he couldn't get into his body was because his body was still too weak. If his body possessed abilities equivalent to the 9 Hearts Lotus, he would never have ended up facing such a difficult time now. He had cultivated his physical body twice, but those were both when he hadn't reached transcendent mortal realm yet. While his physical body was superior to ordinary cultivators, it was still insufficient to house such a large soul. What the hell is this? Jiang Xian was speechless. To absorb too much spiritual energy and be unable to re-enter his body, he was probably the only one in the entire history of the Master-Teacher continent to meet with such a ridiculous situation. The only way I can resolve this problem is to find some way to cultivate my physical body. Only a strong body could harness such a huge soul. However, given that his body had no soul, how could he possibly cultivate? This paradoxical relationship sure made one's head hurt. Boom! Just as Jiang Xian was troubled over the matter, the lake water around him suddenly shook intensely. Lowering his head, he saw a searing heat wave suddenly rising from the bottom of the cleansing lake. This is geothermal heat. Could there be a volcano underneath? Jiang Xian frowned. With his soul energy protecting his physical body, he was in no danger at all. However, to be able to cause the entire lake to boil in the blink of an eye, there must be a massive volcano beneath the lake. Only the earth flame could possess such searing heat. Back then, when retrieving the crimson flame lotus seed, Jiang Xian happened to see it, and he understood how fearsome it could be. At that moment, a thought struck Jiang Xian, and his eyes lit up. Right. If I can draw the earth flame over and create an amalgamation of yin and yang through fusing it with the lake water, perhaps I might be able to temper my physical body without controlling it. In his long journey, he had collected innumerable books, and a huge portion of them were regarding tempering one's physical body. Some involve the usage of poison, some involve pushing oneself to the limit, and some require earth flame and a spiritual energy lake. Earth flame was a flame created naturally formed by the movements of the earth veins, and it harnessed the weight of the earth. On the other hand, spiritual energy lake was formed in a region where spirit veins intersected, and it carried the majesty of nature. If these two were to be fused together, they would create the perfect mix for tempering one's physical body. However, my clone and I have nearly sapped the spiritual energy in the lake dry. With an idea in mind, Jiang Xian felt a little more relaxed. However, a new problem soon emerged. It took innumerable years for so much spiritual energy to gather in the cleansing lake, but in just 8 mere hours, he and his clone had nearly sapped it dry. Without spiritual energy, the entire lake would only be engulfed by the earth flame. If he didn't resolve this problem before drawing the earth flame up, instead of tempering his physical body, he would only be barbecuing himself. Give a few minutes and add a pinch of salt and cumin, and he would be ready to be tucked into. Chapter 646, A Shoe. Forget it, this is a dire situation. I'll use that. Flicking his wrist, Jiang Xian took out the spirit stone that he obtained as the prize for the Master-Teacher tournament. The spiritual energy harnessed within a high-tier spirit stone was immense. Since there was no better choice, Jiang Xian could only make use of it to temper his physical body first. Hong long long. While he was still hesitating over the issue, the ground trembled once more. Then, he heard some muffled voices above the water surface. Following which, many surges of Junqi began gushing into the lake, and the dying spiritual lake came to life once more. This? Zhang Xian's eyes lit up. He was just troubled about how he should return spiritual energy back into the lake when someone suddenly sent Jinqi over. It was as if a pillow was delivered when one was about to nap, or a feast was spread out just as one was hungry. Furthermore, this is Jinqi, refined spiritual energy. It'll be easier for me to absorb it. If Zhang Xian were to use spirit stones, given that the spiritual energy contained inside wasn't refined yet, it would be inconvenient for him to absorb it. However, Jinqi was different. Jinqi was similar to a concentrated extract of spiritual energy, thus making it much easier to absorb. Could someone above know that I'm in dire need of tempering my physical body and intentionally delivered Jinqi over? Zhang Xian scratched his head in confusion. He had been too busy trying to return his soul back into his body to care about what was happening above. Could the others have realized that he needed spiritual energy, and decided to expend their own Jinqi to help him? They were all too kind. Touched, Zhang Xian turned to his clone. You should draw the earth flame up. I'll find the most suitable place to temper my physical body. All right. His clone nodded before rushing to the center of the lake, where the source of the heat was coming from. As a god artifact, the Nine Hearts Lotus was fazed by neither heat nor cold. While the earth flame might be a formidable force, it wasn't sufficient to damage it. After the clone left, Zhang Xian carried his physical body to look for the location most suited to temper his physical body. Soon, Zhang Xian came to a stop. He maneuvered his body such that it was sitting cross-legged on the ground. After a lot of trouble, he managed to open the pores throughout his body, and only then did the Jinqi floating in the river begin to gush into his body. The single origin conceives two, two conceives three, and three conceives all. Heaven's Path Jinqi was refined from the most fundamental and most accurate cultivation technique. It possessed no attribute, and it could fuse together with Jinqi of any attribute. Thus, even though there were many different types of Jinqi around him, it made no difference to him at all. Just by drawing it into his body and driving it toward his dantian, it would be automatically refined to remove all impurities and form the purest Heaven's Path Jinqi. And under the tempering of these aura, Zhang Xian's body was gradually getting stronger and stronger. With a compass in hand, Guild Leader Wu walked a few rounds around the entire lake silently. Seeing the sight, Wei Shi couldn't help but ask, Guild Leader Wu, have you found a solution yet? Calm down, this is a grade 6 formation. With my capability, I can only reinforce it. It would be extremely difficult to modify it. Guild Leader Wu frowned deeply. He was only a 5-star pinnacle formation master, and even if he were to give it his all, he still wouldn't be able to set up a grade 6 formation. The most he could do at the moment was just to sustain the formation. Even though he did say he intended to modify the formation based on the change in geographical terrain, it would be rather unlikely for him to succeed. Then what should we do? We can't possibly go on infusing our Jinqi in like this, Wei Shi exclaimed. Infusing Jinqi into the cleansing lake could postpone the danger, but it wouldn't resolve the problem they had at hand. Give me some time. Guild Leader Wu waved his hands. Even though it's out of desperation that we're infusing Jinqi in, the consumption in maintaining the barrier through such isn't too high. With so many people, we should be able to last for 2 hours. As a lake that was concentrated in spiritual energy previously, it carried the ability to store spiritual energy and Jinqi. While this method might be troublesome, it should still buy them a decent length of time. Within this time period, perhaps he could find a solution to repair the formation. All right then. Knowing that there was no better solution, Wei Shi nodded. Just as he was about to speak, Yu Wentian's face suddenly warped in shock. Wei Shi and Guild Leader Wu, look! Turning their gazes over, they saw the center of the lake shaking violently, and a huge vortex gradually appeared. Tzzzzz. The vortex gradually grew larger. The Jinqi which the crowd had just pumped into the water seemed to have been swallowed whole, disappearing entirely. It seems like it's consuming our Jinqi. That seems to be the case. My Jinqi has disappeared. It's our Jinqi that is preventing the formation from collapsing. Once it is consumed dry. Everyone stared at one another with widened eyes. What was going on? Wasn't this lake a place that could be used to store Jinchi? If that was the case, how was all of their Jinchi consumed in the blink of an eye? Swallowing a mouthful of saliva, Wei Shi turned around and exclaimed, Guild Leader Wu, the lake is consuming our Jinchi. I fear that we won't be able to last 2 hours. Then, how long can you all hold on for? Guild Leader Wu frowned. Wei Shi did a rough calculation based on everyone's cultivation and said, At most, 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Guild Leader Wu's face warped in shock, and he clenched his jaw. 10 minutes is fine too. As long as the earth flame doesn't surge up, we will be safe. I'll try to find a solution within this period of time. Or else. As he spoke, he stared at his compass intently to study the formation. However, at the moment, the ground shook once more. What happened this time? Turning his gaze back to the cleansing lake, he saw Wei Shi and Yu Wentian looking at him with tearful faces. It seems that the earth flame has surged up. Guild Leader Wu felt as though he was about to faint. What the heck was this? When he thought that the cleansing lake could store spiritual energy, and by infusing Jinchi into it, the formation could last for a significant period of time, all of the Jinchi ended up being consumed instead. Just as he said that they would be safe as long as the earth flame doesn't surge up from the volcano, it immediately happened. Dear heavens, are you toying with us? Hong Long Long! As the earth flame threatened to leap out from the lake, the cleansing lake raged once more, and unable to take the impact, an elder was sent flying as mouthfuls of fresh blood spurted from his mouth. Kacha! The formation flag before him also broke into 2 halves. We're done for! With a pale face, Guild Leader Wu couldn't help but stagger backward feebly. The formation was already on the verge of breakdown when there was no spiritual energy in the cleansing lake to maintain it. Now that even the earth flame was gushing up to the earth, the eruption of the volcano was inevitable now. We should hurry up and leave. Guild Leader Wu waved his hands in desolation. With the eruption of this volcano, the entire Huanyu capital would be plunged into a massive catastrophe. Countless lives would die due to this disaster. Is there really no solution at all? Yu Wentian clenched his jaws tightly. None at all, unless... Upon recalling something, Guild Leader Wu shook his head and said, No, it's impossible to pull off. Unless what? Yu Wentian and Wei Shi turned their sights over to Guild Leader Wu. There's no point. It's something that can't possibly be achieved. Guild Leader Wu sighed. Why don't you tell us? Maybe we can find a solution together, Yu Wentian said anxiously. With the earth flame gushing up, the group probably didn't even have 3 minutes left. If Guild Leader Wu had a solution in mind, they could at least give it a try. After all, they couldn't possibly watch idly as millions of lives were extinguished before them. The main purpose of the formation is to maintain balance among the energies from the Verdant Mountain, Dragon-Scaled River, and the Earth Vein, thus suppressing the volcano underneath. This was the reason why Huanyu capital was able to enjoy so many years of peace. However, in the end, a formation can only be considered as an external regulator. If we could find the exact point where the energies of the trio intersect and direct them to cancel one another out, we would be able to return stability to the region even without the formation. But we don't have the luxury of time to do so at this point. Besides, this matter involves the energies from the entire Verdant Mountain, Dragon-Scaled River, and Earth Vein. If we were to make a mistake here, we might just make things much worse, Guild Leader Wu said. Wei Shi and Yu Wentian fell into deep contemplation. The both of them understood the meaning behind Guild Leader Wu's words. In truth, the main purpose of the formation was to regulate the energies from the 3 sides to create a balance. If they could find the balancing point where the 3 energies intersected and direct their flows such that they cancelled one another out, they could create an equivalent effect as well. But, how were they supposed to find this point? Putting aside how the Verdant Mountain and Dragon-Scaled River stretched for thousands of kilometers, just the fact that the Earth Vein was located underground already made it impossible for one to determine the intensity of its energy at specific locations. If they were to make an error and have the energies superimpose on one another instead of cancelling one another out, they could possibly worsen the disaster. This was similar to balancing a gold coin. The slightest deviation would lead to the coin falling. It was no easy feat to balance the three energies. Not to mention, they had no time now. The earth flame was surging up, the Jinchi everyone pumped into the cleansing lake had been devoured, and one of the formation flags was destroyed. In less than 3 minutes, this entire area would be turned into ruins. Nothing would be left behind at all. Let's evacuate everyone now. Guild leader Wu waved his hands. Yes. Knowing that there was nothing they could do, Yi Wentian hurriedly issued instructions to everyone. Walala! The beast tamers on duty were immediately beckoned, and 8 aerial spirit beasts came flying over. Knowing how dangerous the situation was, Yi Wentian had already made preparations should the worst occur. Everyone, hurry up and get on the aerial beasts! Yi Wentian beckoned the group over. But at that moment, the ground trembled once more. Hong long long! The shaking was much more intense this time round. In that instant, it was as if the cleansing lake had been overturned. A searing heat wave gushed forth as though a majestic dragon from the bottom of the lake. Seeing that an explosion was imminent, Hong Shi asked, "What will happen to Zhang Shi if we were to leave like that?" "It's too late to save him, let's go," Yi Wentian shouted. Hong Long! Before he could finish his words, a huge pillar of fire gushed into the air. Everyone felt a searing gust of wind rushing at them, burning their skin. "It's too late. We can't get away anymore." Yi Wentian thought that they would at least have 3 minutes. But before they could even get onto the aerial beasts, the volcano was already erupting. A tight squeeze gripped his heart, and subconsciously, he closed his eyes, awaiting his imminent death. But after waiting for a moment, he realized he wasn't engulfed by the flames. Just as he was perplexed by what was happening, someone amidst the crowd suddenly shouted, "Wait a moment, look! Why is there a person on the flames?" Yi Wentian quickly raised his head and looked over, only to see a man standing above the fire dragon. The other party had a sharp gaze reminiscent of a bolt of lightning. Amidst curious gazes, the other party took off his shoe and threw it casually. "Jia!" The fire dragon immediately withered. The clash among the energies from the verdant mountain, dragon-scaled river, and earth vein immediately calmed down, as though a balance had been achieved. Chapter 647, Yang Shi reappears. This? Wei Shi and Yi Wentian stared at one another in astonishment, as though they had seen a ghost. Guild leader Wu's entire body was trembling non-stop, as if someone was grabbing his neck. His eyes were widened so much that they were about to pop out. It's the balance point. By throwing his shoe, he directed the energies to cancel one another out at the balancing point. The main difficulty with balancing the energies from the verdant mountain, dragon-scaled river, and earth vein was finding the balance point. Once it was found, it wasn't too difficult to re-establish a balance. Just that. Of all the things he had thought of that could resolve the situation, be it a formation plate, a formation flag, or some kind of formidable artifact, to think that it was a mere shoe that saved them from their impending doom. This was nearly inconceivable. How formidable must that person be to achieve such a feat? Who in the world was that person? Just as Guild leader Wu was completely dumbfounded, unable to utter a single word, Hong Shi and Luo Xian's lips trembled, and they hurriedly kneeled to the ground. Junior Hong Qian pays respect to Yang Shi. Junior Luo Xian pays respect to Yang Shi. The duo immediately recognized the figure as soon as he appeared in the air. It was no other than the man who subdued the alliance of the 14 strongest regional powers in Hong Feng Empire single-handedly, the supreme expert. Yang Xian! They thought that they would surely die this time, but who knew that Yang Shi would actually appear at this crucial moment, and resolve their crisis. At this current moment, Yang Xian was standing silently in the air, exuding a calm but unfathomable disposition. Yi Wentian, Wei Shi, and the others turned to look at Hong Shi and Luo Xian questioningly. He is... They were all in the midst of dire trouble when the other party suddenly appeared and resolved the entire crisis with the toss of a shoe. Upon seeing Hong Qian and Luo Xian greeting the other party with utmost respect, they immediately turned to them for answers. Given how the other party was able to easily resolve a situation that was beyond them, it couldn't be clearer that the other party was a formidable figure. Huang Shi swallowed a mouthful of saliva as he said, "This elder is Zhang Xian's teacher, Yang Shi. Even Pavilion Master Mo from the Hongyuan Empire Master Teacher Pavilion has to respectfully address him as senior." Even though this wasn't his first time meeting Yang Shi, the pressure which the other party exerted on him was still as powerful as always. This was especially so on his soul. He felt as though he was facing an immovable mountain, rendering him incapable of even conjuring the slightest thought of aggression. Even Pavilion Master Mo has to respectfully address him as senior? Zhang Shi's teacher? Wei Shi, Yu Wentian, Guild Leader Wu, and the others narrowed their eyes, and their lips twitched violently. One must know that Pavilion Master Mo was a 6-star pinnacle master teacher, an expert who had reached sainthood. And yet, even a person like him had to address this person as senior. How strong must this Yang Shi be? Furthermore, they had lost Zhang Shi's body, and after the previous burst of flames, it was unlikely that even cinders were left of him. For his teacher to appear at this instant, how could they possibly explain this matter to the other party? If only they had known that the other party had such a fearsome teacher, they would have surely braved through danger to look after Zhang Shi. The more they thought about it, the more nervous they became. Thus, the trio hurriedly bowed down. Huanyu Empire's Yi Wentian, Wu Zun, and Wei Jiang pay respect to Yang Shi. With his hands behind his back, Yang Shi stared down at the group coldly. If my student Zhang Xian has erred, you can reprimand and correct him. To leave him to fend for himself in the river, do you think that there's no one behind him? We dare not think so. Seeing that the other party had come due to this matter, everyone froze in fear. At the same time, they felt indignant as well. We really tried to save your student, but in just a moment that our attention was away from him, he leaped into the lake himself. The situation back then was simply too complicated. There was nothing we could have done. You'd better not. Harumphing coldly, Yang Shi turned his gaze away from the crowd. He turned his hand to the cleansing lake and grabbed. An unconscious figure slowly rose from the water. It was Zhang Xian. Just by stretching his hand forward, this Yang Shi actually managed to find Zhang Xian and fish him up. Despite grabbing through space, there isn't the slightest sign of energy ripple in his movement at all. Even a Saint One Dan wouldn't be capable of doing so. Yu Wentian and Wei Shi glanced at one another, and their bodies trembled in fear. That movement might not seem like anything special, but as transcendent Mortal 8 Dan pinnacle experts, they had a clear grasp of how difficult the feat was. They were also capable of grabbing something remotely through space as well, but to find or grab a person over a distance of several dozens of meters from the huge cleansing lake without the slightest energy ripple. This was a feat that no ordinary man was capable of. Even Pavilion Master Mo Gaoyuan from Hongyuan Empire was probably incapable of such a feat. Expert. He was a true expert. Yu Wentian, Wei Shi, and Guild Leader Wu glanced at one another, and their bodies stiffened. There were some master teachers who were very protective of their students, and they would take it personally if one dared to bully their students. If Yang Shi were to really settle this score with them, while they might be esteemed figures in Huanyu Empire, they knew that they were nothing to him. Gritting his teeth, Yu Wentian stepped forward. I apologize for failing to take good care for Zhang Shi. I ask of Yang Shi to punish me. The cleansing lake was a possession of Huanyu Empire's royalty, and he was the one who invited the others over as well. In a sense, the entire matter was intricately related to him, and he wouldn't be able to shirk his responsibility. Yang Shi harumphed. Punish you? If I wished to punish you, do you think that you would be talking to me at this very moment? Flicking his wrist, the unconscious Zhang Xian came to a halt in midair, floating calmly just beside him. Upon seeing this movement, everyone's faces were drained of all color. Even without coming into contact with the other party, just by the energy he leaked, Yang Shi was actually able to allow someone to float by his side. This was a feat completely inconceivable to them. The cleansing lake is formed by the energies from the verdant mountain, dragon-scaled river, and earth vein. If this power is not controlled well, it could result in mass destruction. As a master teacher, this isn't a sight that I wish to see, so I've resolved this problem for you. Glancing at Zhang Xian and noticing that there was nothing wrong with the other party, Yang Shi's complexion alleviated slightly. Flinging his sleeves, he said, "However, this incident has caused massive damage to the cleansing lake. It will take around 50 years before it can recover back to its original state. However, with the three energies in perfect balance, your cultivators can now enter the cleansing lake directly to cultivate. Since there's no longer any dependence on the lake eyes, the 10-year limit can be abolished. Can enter the cleansing lake directly to cultivate? 10-year limit can be abolished?" Initially, when Yi Wentian heard that it would take 50 years for the cleansing lake to recover, he was slightly disappointed. However, when he heard that there was no longer any need to be dependent on the lake eye and that the 10-year limit was no longer applicable, he nearly leaped in joy. Even though the cleansing lake was highly beneficial to one's cultivation, the spiritual energy contained within was simply too violent. One could only cultivate in a lake eye, thus creating a natural restraint of 3 days every 10 years. Once this restraint was gone, given the size of the cleansing lake, a few hundred people would be able to cultivate simultaneously. Furthermore, there was no need for any interval in between. He could already foresee the exponential increase in experts in Huanyu Empire 50 years from now. With this, they would surely be able to rise to the top among Tier 2 empires. While it was impossible for them to become a Tier 1 empire with just this would surely bring their entire nation to greater heights. "Thank you, Yang Shi." Kneeling on the floor, Yi Wentian bowed in earnest gratitude. When something happened to the cleansing lake, he'd thought that Huanyu Empire would come to an end under his rule. Who could have known that this would actually be a blessing in disguise? Not only did Zhang Shi's teacher resolve the issue, he even removed the previous limits on the cleansing lake. With this, the other party saved Huanyu Empire and granted it the potential to stand among the top of other Tier 2 empires. This favor was so great that there was nothing equivalent Huanyu Empire could offer. Seeing Yi Wentian kneeling before him, Yang Shi waved his hands casually before walking on thin air into the distance. Zhang Shi's body floated closely behind him. Soon, the duo disappeared from everyone's sight. To be able to bring another person along with him in a flight. Everyone swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Due to their limited cultivation, most people present here weren't aware of exactly how fearsome Yang Shi was. Even so, the fact that he could settle the cleansing lake, even though it was on the verge of explosion, just by tossing a shoe and bring another person on a flight with him had left them indescribably shocked. No matter how dull-witted they may be, it was clear that Yang Shi was someone they should never trifle with. Even though transcendent mortal 8-dan ethereal treading realm cultivators could step on empty space as well, they were only capable of vertical translation. In a sense, there wasn't much difference from leaping upward. Only upon officially becoming a saint and reaching 1-dan void pursuit realm would one be capable of true flight. But even so, this ability would only be confined to the individual. To actually bring another person with him so casually, the other party's cultivation was beyond their imaginations. Zhang Shi actually has such a powerful teacher? Xing Yuan gulped down his saliva. In truth, he had been thinking of finding an opportunity to teach this brat a lesson so that he would never cause Princess Fei any trouble in the future. But at this moment, he realized how foolish his thoughts were. It was fortunate that he didn't make a move. Otherwise, even his entire clan combined wouldn't be able to withstand a single slap from the other party's teacher. The gap between the both of them was this huge. Even though the strongest man in his clan, the old ancestor, was capable of flight as well, he knew very well that the old ancestor wouldn't be able to bring another person along with him so casually. It seems like I'll have to get on good terms with Zhang Shi in the future, Xing Yuan thought. Zhang Shi's teacher. Yu Fei also widened her eyes in shock. It was no wonder Zhang Xian was able to defeat her time and time again. It turned out that he had such a formidable teacher. With such a formidable figure grooming him, even if she was an incredible talent, it was inevitable that she wouldn't be a match for the other party. Humph! Even if you have a strong teacher, I refuse to be your maid. Let's see who will have the last laugh. She gritted her teeth and clenched her fists. So what if the other party has a powerful teacher? I, you fair, am not one to trifle with either. Do you think I'll serve as your maid obediently? Dream on. If an opportunity comes, I'll surely defeat you in a bet and redeem myself. But at this moment she suddenly recalled that she had just lost another 10,000 spirit stones. How frustrating. That's a relief. Seeing Yang Shi arriving on time to save Zhang Shi, Hong Shi and Luo Xian each heaved a sigh of relief. Luo Qiqi also came to a realization at this moment. She had been wondering why Zhang Shi possessed such astounding knowledge in pill forging. However, Yang Shi's presence explained everything. With such a formidable teacher, it was impossible for the student to be ordinary. The crisis in the cleansing lake might have been resolved, but given the current circumstances, we can't continue cultivating any longer. After seeing off the incredible Yang Shi, Yi Wentian turned to Luo Qiqi, Princess Fair, and the others and apologized. He had invited them over to cultivate so as to get on their good side, but it turned out to be fraught with dangers, and they even almost died here. This was indeed a tragic failure. That's right. Everyone nodded as they turned to look at the ruined cleansing lake with twitching lips. At the same time, a doubt sprouted within their minds. Wasn't this lake supposed to be safe? Why would it suddenly act up? Chapter 648. Verdant Mountain. While everyone was staring at the cleansing lake with doubts in their mind, Yang Shi, who had impressed all of them with his previous incredible feats, suddenly plummeted from the sky as soon as he got out of everyone's sight. Pung! Following which, pained moaning echoed. Slowly, the face of the majestic Yang Shi slowly turned into Zhang Xian's face. Can't you give me a hand instead of watching as I fall from the sky? Grabbing his spinning head, Zhang Xian turned to glare at his clone in anger. Naturally, he was the one feigning Yang Shi, whereas that Zhang Xian was his clone. Back then, at the bottom of the cleansing lake, after absorbing everyone's Jinqi and the earth flame, he managed to strengthen his physical body considerably, thus allowing his 10-meter-large soul to enter his body. Only after this all was done did he realize that the cleansing lake was on the verge of explosion. In order to preserve his life, he immediately checked on the situation with the Library of Heaven's Path, and only then did he realize that he and his clone's action of absorbing all of the spiritual energy from the cleansing lake had disturbed the balance among the three energies, thus causing such a huge commotion. In an instant, he felt embarrassed. The other party had kindly brought him over to cultivate, but he actually caused their lake to explode instead. It was indeed wrong of him to do so. But honestly speaking, he didn't do it intentionally either. All of this had to be blamed on his clone. If not for that fellow absorbing the spiritual energy with all of his might, how could the balance have been disturbed? But it was useless to be pointing fingers now. If he were to run out and explain the situation to Yi Wentian now, the other party would probably kill him with a single slap out of rage. Left with no choice, he could only summon Yang Shi once more. With this expert appearing, he would be able to openly resolve this issue, as well as compensate the other party for the damage. In order to make the entire matter more believable, he even instructed his clone to pass off as the unconscious him. This way, he would be able to brush off everything when he returned. He could simply say that he didn't know anything other than the fact that his teacher saved him. Given that the others had witnessed the previous sight, they probably wouldn't pursue the matter either. And of course, the method of flight that Zhang Xian used was the red dust heaven ascending step. On the other hand, his clone was slightly different. As a god artifact, the Nine Hearts Lotus possessed the innate ability of flight, and this ability was transferred to his clone. With these two working with one another to put on the act, even Wei Shi, a 5-star Higher Master Teacher, failed to see through it. Right after reaching this area, Zhang Xian suddenly found his Jinqi being depleted. Due to the breakthrough his soul and physical body had just undergone, he wasn't able to gauge his Jinqi accurately. As such, his vision just darkened all of the sudden, and he plummeted from the sky. He thought that his clone would at least lend him a hand to help him land safely on the ground. Who knew that this fellow would simply watch idly as he crashed all the way down? Zhang Xian felt so angry that he could explode at any moment. While he wasn't severely injured due to his physical resilience and the low altitude of his flight, he thought that his clone should at least share some of his burdens. What the heck was this? Remember, as a clone, you should rush forward when you see that I'm in difficulty. Just as Zhang Xian was just about to give this fellow an ideology lesson so that he would learn his priorities, the other party slowly closed his eyes. It looked as though he was saying that it's not my fault that you're so dumb. Zhang Xian spurted blood. Just because I said you shouldn't just watch as I fall from the sky, you closed your eyes. How in the world did I create a fool like you? The clones of others were fierce and loyal. When they saw their main body in trouble, they would immediately rush forward to save him. And yet, this fellow actually simply watched as the main body fell to the ground. Just the thought of it left Zhang Xian lightheaded. What a darn clone he had. Forget it, let me see how much stronger I have grown first. Since he couldn't be bothered to lash out at this fellow, Zhang Xian turned his attention to his growth instead. Under the nourishment of the earth flame and spiritual lake, his physical body had grown by leaps and bounds. At this moment, every single cell of his felt strong and flexible, as though they had just gone through a metamorphosis. Raising his arm, he sent a fist forward. Hong Long! The might of his punch shot through the tree as though a fist-sized bullet, rattling the entire tree with its force. My physical body has grown this strong? Zhang Xian's eyes lit up. In the previous attack, he used neither his soul cultivation nor his Jinqi, just solely the strength of his physical body. He wanted to see how much power he could tap into. He didn't expect the force of his punch to be able to create a gaping hole in a gigantic tree a dozen meters away. Even a transcendent mortal 5-Dan consonant spirit realm cultivator would find it hard to execute this kind of attack. Just my physical body itself wields a strength of 2 million ding! Zhang Xian's eyes lit up. With this, he had confirmed the might his physical body wielded. It was actually on par with his Jinqi, reaching 2 million ding. In other words, without Jinqi or soul energy, just by the might of his flesh itself, he could destroy a consonant spirit realm primary stage cultivator. Fearsome. What about my soul cultivation? After testing his physical body, Zhang Xian raised his palm and drove his soul energy. Hong Long! A small hill dozens of meters away was immediately reduced to dust. Even though the might is still capped at consonant spirit realm pinnacle, 3,200,000 ding, my stamina has improved. I'll be able to sustain my soul energy longer in a fight. Zhang Xian's eyes lit up. Even though Zhang Xian's soul had grown to a height of 10 meters, the might he could tap into didn't increase. It was still at 3,200,000 ding. What improved instead was his stamina. Making an analogy, if an ordinary human were to harness all of their might, they might be able to lift an object of 100 kilograms. However, that would be their limit, and they would need to rest for quite a while before they could do so once more. 3,200,000 ding referred to the maximum might one could harness in an attack. In other words, it was impossible for one to launch such an attack continuously without rest. However, as Zhang Xian's soul reached a height of 10 meters, the limits of his stamina were released. He was now able to launch attacks of 3,200,000 ding without tiring himself out. This was an extremely fearsome ability. If he could sustain a might of 3,200,000 ding in every single attack, he could even kill a Cosmos Bridge Realm primary stage cultivator. With 2 million ding from my physical body, 2 million ding from my Jinqi, and 3,200,000 ding from my soul cultivation, I can rival even a transcendent mortal 6-Dan Cosmos Bridge Realm pinnacle cultivator in a fight. Taking a deep breath, Zhang Xian could feel overwhelming power flowing through his body, as though an undefeatable titan. Despite being at clarifying turbidity realm pinnacle, he already harnessed a might superior to Cosmos Bridge pinnacle experts, who wielded a might of 6,400,000 ding. There was probably no one who wouldn't feel excited at that thought. Come, let's cross fists! Chuckling lightly, Zhang Xian turned to his clone. Due to the limits of his physical body, he was sent flying by the other party's fist the previous time. However, with a breakthrough in all aspects, it would be difficult for the other party to do the same now. Perhaps, he might even be able to teach the other party a lesson and let him know the difference between the main body and a clone. On! His clone nodded his head. Gathering might in his fist, he punched forward. On the other hand, Zhang Xian gathered the might from his body, soul, and Jinqi, and in an instant, his strength was brought to its peak. With the current might he possessed, he felt that even a transcendent mortal 7-Dan primary stage expert could be killed with a single punch. Boom! The two fists collided. You! A scream in agony echoed in the air. While his clone stood completely motionless on the spot, Zhang Xian was sent flying backward. His body tore through a dozen huge trees over a distance of several hundred meters before finally coming to a stop. Blood spewed profusely from his mouth. The heck? Did you need to be so vicious? He thought that was such a massive improvement, he would be able to easily teach the other party a lesson. Who knew that the gap between them only seemed to have widened? He had used his full strength, but not only was the other party completely fine, he also nearly died from the encounter himself. How could reality be so darned? Are you the clone or am I? Struggling to his feet, Zhang Xian glared at the other party. Your physical body is still too weak, so you aren't able to bring out the full might of your soul. Just as Zhang Xian was feeling displeased, his clone walked over with his hands behind his back, carrying an authoritative disposition. If you wish to defeat me, you still need much more practice. But of course, if you acknowledge me as your teacher, I can teach you. Scram! With a darkened face, Zhang Xian put that fellow straight into his storage ring. His clone actually tried to take him as a student? What was the world turning into? If you're that capable, why don't you try ascending to the heavens? That fellow's words might be infuriating, but he does make sense. After putting away the other party, Zhang Xian frowned. It was indeed true that his physical body wasn't unable to bring out the full might of his soul cultivation. While his physical body had made massive progress under the tempering of the earth flame and spiritual lake, the duration was too short. It was only sufficient for his massive soul to slip into his body. It still wasn't enough for his soul to fuse perfectly with his body and bring out the full extent of his strength. With a certain degree of incompatibility between my soul and physical body, I won't have precise control over my strength. A powerful soul needs a powerful body to house it. Otherwise, it would be like an adult taking control over an infant's body. No matter how powerful the adult was, it was impossible for him to bring out his full might through an infant's body. In fact, the difference between the strength of the two might even cause the adult to be unable to control his own strength precisely as well. This was exactly the situation that was happening with Zhang Xian. Even though his soul had finally grown to be capable of housing his massive soul, it was still comparatively much weaker than it. As such, his control over his soul cultivation and physical body wasn't as thorough as it used to be. In a sense, it was similar to the situation when he first cultivated Heaven's Path Golden Body in Master Lu Chen's house. Although he didn't feel that he had used too much strength, he ended up sending Master Lu Chen flying with a touch. Just that this time, the lack of control worked both ways. His strength could be either much stronger or weaker than what he perceived himself. It seems like I'll have to train my physical body. Zhang Xian massaged his glabella. The momentary tempering just now was clearly insufficient. It seemed that he had to hurry up and raise the strength of his physical body. Otherwise, if he were to suddenly have a burst of strength and a moment of frailty now and then, others might just think that he was a lunatic. Or else, I could ask Emperor Yi Wentian for some cultivation techniques for training one's physical body. As long as I can compile Heaven's Path Golden Body 3 Dan, my physical body should grow significantly stronger. As long as he had sufficient physical body cultivation techniques, his library of Heaven's Path would be able to form a Heaven's Path Golden Body, and he would be able to improve swiftly. Where am I? Only after deciding on his next course of action was Zhang Xian's attention brought back to his surroundings. Taking a glance, he was stunned. This is the Verdant Mountain? Back then, He was in a hurry to escape as soon as possible, so he didn't take note of it, but it seemed like he had traveled a long distance away from Huanyu capital, reaching the depths of Verdant Mountain. Chapter 649. Heartthrob. A towering, winding mountain range filled with a light fragrance from primitive and foreign flora and fauna. Even though it was already deep into winter, the spiritual energy in the region was still filled with the vitality of spring. After taking a look, Zhang Xian complimented his surroundings. This verdant mountain is indeed a blessed land for cultivation. To rise above innumerable kingdoms to become a Tier 2 empire, while having a strong master-teacher pavilion was important, so was attracting capable talents and possessing a good geographical terrain. Be it the verdant mountain or the dragon-scaled river, their lands carried a soothing atmosphere and gentle spiritual energy that boosted one's cultivation. Let's return first. After resting for a moment to recuperate from the injuries incurred from the previous fall, Zhang Xian prepared to return to the capital when the leaves not too far away rustled. Shhhh. Following which, a massive armored bear tiger came into view. It was trudging forward warily in a certain direction. Zhang Xian was taken aback. The armored bear tiger was an incredibly ferocious transcendent mortal 5-Dan spirit beast. Known as the autarch of the forest, even a transcendent mortal 6-Dan primary stage cultivator would find it hard to defeat it. This fellow usually hunted openly since nothing could possibly stand in its way. Why was it moving around carefully as though it was some kind of wolf? More importantly, since Zhang Xian was able to see the other party should have noticed him as well, given its cultivation. Yet, it actually continued moving along its path, ignoring him entirely. This left some doubts in his mind. Let's see what that fellow is up to. Zhang Xian's curiosity was immediately piqued. He leaped onto a tree branch and followed behind the armored bear tiger. Soon, the large fellow bent low, looking around his surroundings in alarm as it advanced slowly. Hoo! At a distance not too far away, Zhang Xian could see a massive Grand Lion spirit beast. Just like the armored bear tiger, the Grand Lion spirit beast was a transcendent mortal 5-Dan spirit beast as well. Given that they were equally matched in strength and shared the same prey, they were usually in a hostile relationship. It seems like its nemesis has appeared. Perhaps these two are intending on assaulting one another. Zhang Xian chuckled. He was still wondering what was happening, but it turned out that two nemeses had just met one another, and they were prowling around for an opportunity to strike at the other. I should pay careful attention to their battle. Perhaps, I might be able to learn some new techniques to infuse into my battle techniques. Zhang Xian thought. Since everyone knew that he was taken away by his teacher, he was in no hurry to return. Such a ferocious battle could broaden his horizons, so it would be a pity to miss it. In fact, there were many incredible techniques that were created after watching spirit beasts fight one another. Squatting on a tree branch, Zhang Xian watched as the armored bear tiger and Grand Lion spirit beast slowly approached one another. Before long, they had already circled around the shrubs and saw one another. Zhang Xian thought that a magnificent battle would break out instantly, but contrary to his expectations, the duo simply nodded their heads, seemingly coming to an agreement, before heading forward side by side. Zhang Xian blinked his eyes in surprise. When did these two nemeses become good friends? Furthermore, from the looks of it, they seemed to be working in unison. Curious, Zhang Xian followed behind them. A little distance away, the loud roaring of the wind echoed from above. A massive aerial spirit beast swooped down from the air. Transcendent Mortal 5-Dan aerial spirit beast. Draco-Eagle beast? Zhang Xian widened his eyes in shock. This fellow was extremely famous as well. With steel talons that could even rip apart spirit intermediate tier weapons, it was given the majestic name of Sky Overlord. Even 3 of his demon sync beasts wouldn't be a match for the Draco-Eagle beast. Were these two spirit beasts working together to deal with it? But that shouldn't be possible. The spirit beasts on land and in the sky usually didn't cross one another. Besides, the other party was capable of flight, so how could the duo possibly attack it? This was similar to how a lion would usually prey on rabbits and deer instead of sparrows and crows. Since they were from two completely different worlds, there was no need for them to cross one another. Voila! By the time Zhang Xian had recovered from his astonishment, the Draco-Eagle beast had already landed before the other spirit beasts. Just like before, it nodded its head toward the duo, and as though coming to an understanding, the trio advanced forward together. The Draco-Eagle beast is collaborating with them as well? Zhang Xian's shock was gradually deepening. It was already baffling that two nemeses of the forest were working with one another. Now that even the Sky Overlord was cooperating with them, what in the world could they be up to? What could have happened for them to put aside their differences and ally with one another? SSSSSSS. Walking on, the group stumbled by a massive python, a ferocious ape, a swift sparrow. Before long, more than 30 spirit beasts were gathered together. All of them possessed a cultivation of at least transcendent mortal 5 Dan, and given their natural advantages as spirit beasts, Zhang Xian would have a difficult time defeating even a single one of them. Yet, so many of them were gathered together at this instant. Even a person as brave as Zhang Xian couldn't help but feel his goosebumps rising in fear. It will be difficult for me to escape if they notice me. Zhang Xian moved carefully in fear, afraid that he would accidentally make a noise that would catch their attention. His palm was drenched with cold sweat. If they were to manage to surround him, there was a chance that he would even be done in. Flying, crawling, running, slithering. There were truly spirit beasts of all sorts. Every single one of them possessed might that an ordinary transcendent mortal 5 Dan pinnacle cultivator would find hard to stand against. Together, not even a 7 Dan expert would escape from their clutches. What is it that brought so many spirit beasts together? Are they going to fight an enemy? Despite the danger involved in this matter, Zhang Xian couldn't hold back his curiosity. So many different species of spirit beasts were present here, and a huge bunch of them were even nemeses of one another. And yet, here they were, working together with one another. What could have happened? Could it be that they have found some kind of treasure? A thought popped into Zhang Xian's mind, and excitement began to tingle within him. It was rumored that true treasures would attract the presence of countless spirit beasts, or even incur a stampede. Could these fellows be gathered for some kind of incredible treasure? That's not it. If it's a treasure, they would probably be fighting with one another over it at this instant. However, Zhang Xian soon rejected the idea. There would be no one who wouldn't wish to claim a treasure for themselves. If that was truly the case, it would be impossible for them to work together. It would be a scene of bloodshed instead. No matter what, I should just watch on. The answer should unfold itself soon. Since he was already up to this point, he had to get to the bottom of the matter. Thus, he followed behind the group discreetly. Walala! While he was following behind the group, a slight rustling sounded from the trees ahead, and a group of silhouettes appeared. This? Upon seeing those silhouettes, Zhang Xian widened his eyes in shock. All that came before were all spirit beasts, but this group were all humans. There were 7 to 8 of them, and just like the spirit beasts, they had all reached transcendent mortal 5 Dan as well. There was a slight but distinct scent of blood coming from them. They are beast hunters. A name appeared in Zhang Xian's mind, and excitement immediately overwhelmed him. A spirit beast's skin, bones, blood, and inner core were extremely valuable treasures to cultivators. In fact, there was even a market specializing in such sales. Given how lucrative the market was, there was naturally a group of people who specialized in hunting down spirit beasts and procuring the useful body parts, thus giving rise to a unique occupation, beast hunters. However, just like herbologists, the beast hunter occupation wasn't acknowledged by the master teacher pavilion. It wasn't due to how cruel the occupation was, but that it had no complete heritage. Most people chose this life due to compelling situations, and as such, there were no organizations nor guilds regulating them and passing down knowledge. Furthermore, the death toll of this occupation was simply too huge. The hunters would often become hunted themselves, thus making it difficult to pass down their heritage. As such, it couldn't really be called a unique occupation. But even so, there was quite a number of them over the entire continent, and they were recorded in books too. Just that, this group of beast hunters had actually come together with the spirit beasts. The beast hunters simply walked up to the pack of spirit beasts, nodded, and then they began advancing together. Beast hunters and spirit beasts were mortal enemies, and yet they were walking side by side at this moment. What the heck was going on? What should have been a great battle between the spirit beasts and the beast hunters ended up as though an amicable meeting among old friends. This was contradictory and bewildering. As the group slowly grew larger, in order to prevent himself from being noticed, Zhang Xian could only fly amidst the lush leaves using the red dust heaven ascending steps. After advancing a little further, they arrived at the bottom of a waterfall. The water cascaded from a height of 3,000 qi, creating a deafening roar. A slight vapor rose from the bottom of the waterfall, nourishing the brilliant greenery in the area. Zhang Xian was perplexed. It's the middle of winter. How come the greenery is so verdant? While the greenery in Verdant Mountain wouldn't wither due to the rich spiritual energy in the area, the color of the greenery would still darken in the middle of winter. But the greenery in this region had a bright shade of green, as though it was the onset of spring. This very sight was baffling. Could there be something special about this waterfall? Walala! Beneath the waterfall was a massive lake. A white, furry spirit beast was swimming freely in it. That fellow was around the size of a watermelon, and its bright eyes only made it more adorable. This is a snow fox. Furthermore, it seems that it is a newborn. Zhang Xian immediately recognized the spirit beast. Snow fox was an extremely rare spirit beast. It possessed nearly no offensive ability, but its inner core was exceptionally valuable. Rumor had it that it contained a unique energy that could allow both cultivators and spirit beasts to unconditionally raise their cultivation by a big realm. This wasn't just primary stage to intermediate stage, or intermediate stage to advanced stage, it was a big realm. In other words, it could allow a clarifying turbidity realm cultivator to reach consonant spirit realm directly. It was among one of the most sought-after treasures in the world. But a mere snow fox shouldn't require all of these fellows to work together, though. The snow fox might be valuable, but considering its lack of offensive power, the armored bear tiger, grand lion spirit beast, or any of the other spirit beasts could easily tear it apart. Why would they march here in such a large group then? Furthermore, considering that this was a newborn snow fox, surely these fellows need not proceed so warily? No, it seems like the one they intend to deal with is. Baffled, Zhang Xian took a closer look and realized that the spirit beasts and beast hunters were looking at a specific direction. Tracing their gazes, he was taken aback. By the side of the lake stood a white-robed lady. She stood silently amidst flowers and grass, as if a peaceful painting. It was simply too tranquil that even with a soul as strong as Zhang Xian's, he didn't notice her presence at all. As Zhang Xian turned his gaze over, the white-robed lady also turned her face over. Her beautiful features seemed to meld together with the peaceful scenery. With just a momentary glance, Zhang Xian's heart skipped a beat. For the first time since he arrived in this world, Zhang Xian's composed state of mind was sent into disarray. Chapter 650. Saving her. Zhang Xian had seen many beauties. Xinbai Ru Mou, Zhao Feiwu, Yu Fei'er, Luo Qiqi. Even his students, Wang Ying and Zhao Ye, were beauties in their own rights. Among them, there were a few who bore feelings for him, and some even voiced their willingness to be with him. But Zhang Xian's heart remained unmoved. He wasn't devoid of feelings, nor was he uninterested in beautiful ladies, he was simply unmoved. Since he possessed no particular feelings for them, he wasn't willing to get involved with them. He thought that it might be due to the Library of Heaven's path in his head. Perhaps the library had come together with the unfeelingness of the heavens. Never had he imagined a day would come where his heart would actually beat helplessly at the sight of a lady. It was as if the other party possessed some kind of quality that drew him in, leaving him with no choice but to leap forward. She was extremely beautiful, such that even Zhao Ye would pale before her. Even so, Zhang Xian's mind wasn't so weak as to be assailed by mere physical appearance. But for some reason, this lady had an extraordinarily intimate presence to him. As if he had seen her somewhere before. I mustn't allow anything happen to her. Such a thought simply appeared out of nowhere. Prowling in the area were more than 30 transcendent mortal 5 Dan spirit beasts, and 8 beast hunters. If they were to attack the white-robed lady, she would surely be unable to withstand their assault. Save her! This thought sprouted in Jiang Xian's mind, and it was growing stronger by the second, compelling him into action. He didn't want to see this white-robed lady being torn apart by all of these spirit beasts. If I were to rush forward to save her, I would be surrounded by them before I could even reach her. If so, I would be dead before I could even achieve anything. While the thought had gripped Jiang Xian's entirety, he knew that it would be foolishness to dive in without a plan. There were plenty of formidable aerial spirit beasts amidst the group as well. Even with Jiang Xian flight capability, it would still be difficult for him to outrun them. Should I disguise myself as Yang Shi to scare this group off? After a moment of thought, Jiang Xian realized that he couldn't find any better idea. Thus, he decided to resort to his specialty, hoodwinking. If he could frighten this group off, that would be for the best. Otherwise, he would have no choice but to face them. At the most, he would just have to call his clone out at that time to fight alongside him. While victory was unlikely, he was confident that he could at least get away. It's settled then. Gritting his teeth, Jiang Xian refined the details of his plan before standing up. His muscles slowly shifted, turning his appearance into that of Yang Shi. Walala! Right when he was done with his preparations, the spirit beasts finished circling the entire area. There was a bizarre glint in their eyes, and it seemed as though they would leap forward at any moment. I have to go in now or else I won't make it in time. Frowning, Jiang Xian immediately flew straight toward the side of the lake, where the white-robed lady was. Humph! While he was in the air, a cold harumph resounded in the area. It sounded like the roar of a dragon, causing the entire forest to tremor. His soul energy and Jinqi were devoted to this harumph, and it carried a grandness that made one feel small in comparison. Accustomed to playing as an expert, Jiang Xian naturally commanded an aura befitting of one. With his majestic demeanor, he resembled a deity descending from the heavens. The spirit beasts and beast hunters who were just about to pounce on the white-robed lady all halted their movements before his presence. While the intelligence of spirit beasts hadn't reached the level of humans yet, they were still no fools. Considering how the figure was able to fly in the sky, it was unlikely that they would be able to stand against him. Who? Seeing that his presence had made everyone stop for the moment, Jiang Xian heaved a sigh of relief. With a few steps, he walked to the aerial space right above the white-robed lady. From the current location where he was standing, he would be able to grab her and escape swiftly should the unexpected happen. Now that he was closer to the white-robed lady, he was able to catch a clearer look at the latter's features. She was a young lady of a similar age to him. She had a composed look on her face, seemingly unaware that she was already completely surrounded by many spirit beasts and beast hunters. With his hands behind his back, Jiang Xian's gaze fell upon the spirit beasts and beast hunters. I am fond of this scenery, and I don't wish for blood to besmirch this land. Back down! After saying these words, he secretly sent a telepathic message to the young lady below him. Try to find a way to escape later on. Spirit beasts have already surrounded this area, and I fear that they mean you harm. However, after waiting for a while, Jiang Xian still didn't receive the other party's reply. Glancing downward, he saw the white-robed lady looking at him nonchalantly. Could it be that she doesn't believe me? Jiang Xian frowned. Those spirit beasts and beast hunters had approached silently, and they were currently hiding amidst the greenery. It was possible that the other party did not believe his words. Thinking about it, it wasn't too surprising. Given that a man had suddenly appeared and sent a telepathic message to her saying that the area was filled with spirit beasts, she would probably think that he was a lunatic. Do my words mean nothing to you? Knowing that he would only make himself seem less credible the more he explained the matter, Jiang Xian decided to turn his gaze back to the forest, flung his sleeves, and roared. I told you to back down! Roar! Jiang Xian's bellow had succeeded in inducing fear in the spirit beasts in the region. One of them unintentionally let loose a fearful whimper, revealing its presence. Knowing that the other party was already aware of their presence, the spirit beasts and beast hunters decided to step out of their hiding spots. Walala! The might of more than 30 transcendent mortal 5 Dan spirit beasts and 8 beast hunters exerted an immense pressure on Zhang Xian. Now you should believe me, right? They are intending to deal with you and your snow fox. Cold sweat dripped off Zhang Xian's forehead as he sent a telepathic message to the white-robed lady. The white-robed lady seemed to be slightly astonished by the arrival of the spirit beasts as well. You don't need to fear. Since I'm here, I won't allow them to do as they please. Don't worry, I'll chase them off for you. Zhang Xian reassured her before turning to the crowd. Are you certain you want to challenge me? Hong Long. A powerful surge of soul energy swept through the entire area. Zhang Xian's cultivation might be ordinary, but his soul energy was superior to even the transcendent mortal 8 Dan Yuantian's. With the release of his soul energy, the spirit beasts and beast hunters immediately felt immense threat. Pada! One of the aerial spirit beasts even lost control of its body and plummeted from the sky. A few spirit beasts also collapsed to the ground, unable to withstand the pressure. Seeing this situation, the tense Zhang Xian heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed these spirit beasts were no fools. They knew better than to challenge an opponent beyond them. Roar! But just as Zhang Xian thought that the group would back down from fear, a ferocious howling sounded. It came from the armored bear tiger that he first met. Walala! Hearing the howling, the frightened spirit beasts immediately regained their nerves. They turned their gazes over once more. This time, it was filled with savagery. What's going on? It was just a moment ago that all of them were trembling in fear. Yet, after this fellow's howling, all of them seemed to have regained their fighting spirit. Zhang Xian's face immediately warped in fear. Could it be that this armored bear tiger recognized him as the person from before? In the previous meeting with this fellow, his true cultivation was probably exposed. But even so, the person whom he saw previously was Zhang Xian, while the current him was Yang Shi. How could the other party possibly recognize him? Roar! While Zhang Xian was still bewildered by the situation before him, the armored bear tiger yelled furiously once more. Pushing its large paws against the ground, it leaped forward. This is bad. Zhang Xian's face darkened. It was extremely clear that he had given himself away somehow. It seemed that his disguise still needed a little more work for it to be effective under the scrutiny of spirit beasts' astute senses. Even though they didn't possess intelligence on par with humans, they had sharp eyes and sensitive noses in exchange. Perhaps he had neglected an important aspect of his disguise that allowed the armored bear tiger to see through it. Or perhaps it might be due to the lack of harmony between his soul and his body, resulting in his inability to hide his aura perfectly. With his aura leaking out, it wasn't too difficult for them to deduce that this expert was a fake. I have no choice but to fight them now. Seeing the large fellow rush over, Zhang Xian knew that a fight was inevitable. Thus, he rushed in front of the white-robed lady and grabbed her hand. Run! Who? But before they could escape, the armored bear tiger was already right before Zhang Xian. It swung its massive claws, and a sharp wave of might tore through space, heading straight for Zhang Xian's arm. Damn it! Zhang Xian's face darkened. The armored bear tiger was much stronger and faster than he had expected. The strongest aspects of an armored bear tiger was its claws and strength. Even though Zhang Xian's physical body had been tempered by the cleansing lake, it would still be hard for him to clash with the other party face-on. Letting go of the lady, Zhang Xian flicked his wrist and the glacier rain sword appeared in his palm. He immediately slashed it toward the other party's claw. Voila! The sword chi immediately covered a distance of several dozen meters and collided with the other party's attack. Boom! A loud explosion created 2 huge depressions of 7 to 8 meters deep. Zhang Xian remained unmoving on the spot whereas the armored bear tiger was forced back. A shallow, white cut appeared on its body. Even though the armored bear tiger was one of the strongest even among transcendent mortal 5 Dan spirit beasts, Zhang Xian's soul, physical body, and Jinchi were simply extraordinary. Even so, the other party was indeed formidable. If it had been any other ordinary transcendent mortal 5-dan spirit beast, Zhang Xian's sword would have surely split it in two. To leave behind just a single shallow white cut said a lot about the other party's fearsome defensive capability. Roar, roar, roar! However, the very survival of the armored bear tiger against Zhang Xian showed that he wasn't sufficiently powerful to stand against all of them. The spirit beasts and beast hunters in the surroundings immediately realized that Zhang Xian was just acting before. Thus, with a loud roar, they charged forward furiously. So. Numerous arrows also came flying straight toward Zhang Xian, the beast hunters. They specialized in long-range attacks, and their arrows were infused with dense jinchi. Even from afar, astounding killing intent could be felt from them. Narrowing his eyes, Zhang Xian felt his goosebumps rising up. There were aerial spirit beasts to guard the sky, land spirit beasts to charge on land, and even long-range support fire from the beast hunters. If they managed to surround him, it would be difficult for him to break out from their encirclement even with the help of his clone. Flee! Flicking his wrist swiftly, multiple blasts of sword she shot out to deflect the arrows. Following which, Zhang Xian pulled the white-robed lady forward and leaped into the lake. Amidst this perilous situation, this was the only possible escape route. Chapter 651 Consonance of Soul and Body. The white-robed lady seemed to be unwilling to leave, but Zhang Xian knew that there wasn't time to persuade her. Thus, he pulled her along forcefully. Putong! The duo fell into the lake. Seeing the two of them enter the lake, the snow fox also came swimming over. Let's leave quickly. Otherwise, we'll surely die. Grabbing the snow fox with one hand and pulling the white-robed lady with the other, Zhang Xian yelled anxiously as he swam to the depths of the lake. He had examined the spirit beasts carefully, and there were none that specialized in aqua combat. They would be much safer down here. Furthermore, this lake was connected to a river. It was possible for them to escape from their pursuers through here. Hula! Not too long after they swam down into the depths of the lake, a violent disturbance rippled from the top of the lake. There were a couple of spirit beasts who jumped into the lake to pursue them. Knowing that there was no time to be lost, Zhang Xian drove his jinchi, and they picked up speed. Based on his memory, he swam in the direction where the river was at. As Zhang Xian expected, they were indeed much safer in the water. While there were some spirit beasts who chased them, he managed to ward them off with relative ease. Slowly, the number of spirit beasts decreased. After around 2 hours, they managed to shake off all of the spirit beasts. Only then did Zhang Xian heave a sigh of relief and start swimming to the surface. Holding his breath for 2 hours wasn't too hard for him given his current cultivation. Turning to look at the white-robed lady beside him, it seemed that the other party was fine as well. Considering how the spirit beasts had to approach her so carefully, it was likely that her cultivation was on par with his. Who? As the beast and 2 humans emerged from the water, Zhang Xian immediately scanned his surroundings. Only after confirming that there was no danger did he heave a sigh of relief. It's safe now. Zhang Xian pulled the lady to the shore. After swimming for 2 hours, they were now a considerable distance away from the waterfall. Given the various splits in the meandering river along the way, it would be hard for the spirit beasts to track them down. However, it was best for them to be careful anyway. The other party did have aerial spirit beasts who specialized in scouting on their side. Let's find a safe spot, get some food, and dry our clothes. The 3 of them were looking rather unkempt after the long swim. Their clothes were sticking firmly to their skin. Zhang Xian smiled bitterly. Knowing that Zhang Xian had gone through so much to save her, the white-robed lady seemed much friendlier from before. Smiling, she nodded in agreement at his words. There were several large caves dug out by the spirit beasts in Verdant Mountain. It didn't take too long for the duo to find an empty one. Following which, they gathered a few dry branches and started a campfire. Only then did they feel their bodies warming up. Even with cultivation levels such as theirs, swimming for 2 hours in the middle of winter was still no joke. The chill felt like a sharp dagger stabbing at their insides. I am Zhang Xian. You are. After drying his clothes, Zhang Xian took out a few pieces of dried jerky from his storage ring and offered them to the other party. Following which, he reverted his appearance and clasped his fists. For some reason, this lady simply felt extremely familiar to him, as though he had known her all his life. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone through so much trouble to save her. With a faint smile, the lady shook her head. She took the jerky from Zhang Xian's hands, tore off a small portion, and ate it. Her movements were extremely graceful and refined. You can't speak? Realizing that the other party hadn't spoken a word since they met, Zhang Xian was taken aback. Until now, it seemed like the other party had been replying to his words with a smile. The lady shook her head. Is it due to some kind of persisting illness, or do you need me to treat you? I am actually quite a capable physician, Zhang Xian said. There were some who would lose their voice due to injury or cultivating incorrectly. However, it was still treatable as long as one had the correct treatment method. Considering how he had read many books on medicine, and also had the Library of Heaven's Path to fall back on, it shouldn't be too difficult for him to treat the other party. The white-robed lady shook her hands. Are you afraid that I can't cure you, or are you unwilling to be treated? Zhang Xian frowned. The lady continued to shake her hands nonchalantly. It seemed as though she was already used to being in such a situation, and she didn't want to be treated. Since that's the case, I won't talk about it any more then. Since the other party wasn't willing to be treated, Zhang Xian couldn't possibly force his treatment on her. For some reason, sitting beside this lady made him feel extremely calm, drawing him away from the material aspect of life. Sitting silently, Zhang Xian was searching for something, anything, to say when his face suddenly warped in pain. His entire body began shaking uncontrollably. Shit! Zhang Xian clenched his fists tightly. Even though his physical body had grown much stronger after the tempering from the earth flame and cleansing lake, it wasn't sufficient for him to fully adapt to his massive soul. Thus, he should have avoided overexerting himself while training his physical body for it to adapt to his soul. Who knew that he would have met with this white-robed lady and end up overexerting himself? He didn't feel anything in the face of danger back then, but now that they were safe, he immediately felt a sharp pain in his soul as though someone had stabbed needles deep into it, and dizziness suddenly overwhelmed him. Using the shoe measurements in his previous life, his current soul was size 45 while his physical body was size 42. While he could still slip in with some force, he would still be injured should he walk too much. The current situation was as such. Even though his body and soul were incompatible with one another, he might still have been fine if he hadn't overexerted himself. But he did, and now he had to tolerate an insufferable pain in his soul. Honestly, Zhang Xian wanted to leave a good impression on the other party by saving her, but such a situation happened instead. He couldn't help but feel a little stifled. Suppress! Zhang Xian forcefully suppressed his soul to force it to adapt to his physical body. Who knew that the more he tried to do so, the more violent the backlash became? It was as if the side effect of forcefully stuffing his soul back into his body was coming back to bite him all at once. With a roar, Zhang Xian couldn't hold on any longer, and his soul began gushing out of his glabella. It was the previous problem playing up again, an overly powerful soul for a relatively weak physical body. Unless he could raise the strength of his physical body, the two wouldn't be able to fuse together perfectly. It's over. Feeling that his soul was about to leave his body, Zhang Xian's heart turned cold. Actually, if his soul were to leave his body, he would be able to avoid such pain. But if he were to allow it to occur now, it would be as good as telling the other party that he was a soul oracle, and this would be difficult to explain. Even though the soul oracle occupation was a complete one, its heritage had already gone missing for many years, and it had officially been eradicated by the Master Teacher Pavilion a long time ago. In the view of most cultivators, they were a callous and mysterious existence. If the other party were to learn that he had such a sinister occupation, the goodwill that he had built up with much difficulty would definitely disappear instantaneously. What in the world was this? Of all the times for his condition to work up, it just had to be now. How would the other party view him after this? Would she think that he was up to no good? Just as Zhang Xian was at a complete loss, the white-robed lady stood up and pressed on his glabella lightly. Hula! The soul that was about to slip out of his body was suppressed in an instant, and it returned obediently back into his body. At the same time, a unique energy flowed through his entire body, relieving it of the extreme pain it felt instantaneously. This? Zhang Xian widened his eyes in shock. This was a problem which had troubled him greatly, and yet the other party resolved it with a single pat. What was this? Could it be that the white-robed lady possessed a cultivation far higher than the transcendent mortal 8 Dan Yi Wentian? One must know that not even Yi Wentian could resolve the problem of his soul going missing. Otherwise, he wouldn't have just placed Zhang Xian on the stone table helplessly. Doubtful, Zhang Xian was just about to ask about the issue when a pang of exhaustion suddenly struck him. His vision darkened, and he gradually lost consciousness. Amidst his sleep, he felt as though his soul and physical body were harmonizing once more, and the discomfort he felt previously gradually vanished. Some time later, he woke up. Rubbing his eyes, Zhang Xian sat up. Indeed, the incompatibility between his soul and physical body had vanished, and he felt much more relaxed than before. My physical body hasn't gotten any stronger, but my soul seemed to have undergone some kind of refinement. It has become much purer, making it easier to slip it into my body. Zhang Xian's eyes lit up. Even though his soul was still 10 meters tall, it had become much more flexible, making it easier to enter his body and control it. I should give it a try. Closing his eyes, Zhang Xian's soul swept through his body, and he could feel that every single muscle and cell was within his control. He could now perfectly move his entire body. Even before the affair at the cleansing lake, he had never felt such precise control over his body before. This is perfect consonance of body and soul? Zhang Xian clenched his fists tightly, and his body trembled in excitement. At Transcendent Mortal 5 Dan, a cultivator would be able to harmonize his body and soul as one. This consonance would refine his control over his strength and body, allowing for more precise movements. Rumor had it that if this consonance were to reach the level of perfection, one would be able to look inwardly into one's physical body and repair the damaged regions. One's body would be able to become as flawless as a piece of white jade. However, even Transcendent Mortal 9 Dan experts would be unable to reach such a realm. Only saints would have a chance of accomplishing this, and yet, Zhang Xian actually succeeded. In the midst of Zhang Xian's excitement, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind, and he froze. But if my soul and body are perfectly consonant, won't my soul be unable to leave my body? Typically, becoming a soul oracle meant abandoning one's natural body. As far as Zhang Xian knew, no soul oracle had achieved a perfect consonance of body and soul before. If his soul and body were to be perfectly consonant while he was unconscious, would it mean that he had lost his ability as a soul oracle? If that was the case, then there was nothing for him to be happy about. Even taking the occupations from ancient times into account, the abilities of a soul oracle were one of the more practical and useful ones. For example, there would be no other occupation that would have allowed Zhang Xian to absorb the spiritual energy from the cleansing lake earlier on. Thus, Zhang Xian quickly drove the soul-guiding formula. Fortunately, he realized that his soul could still part from his body and move freely. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. Sending his soul back into his physical body, Zhang Xian stood up and looked around the cave. However, the cave was oddly silent. The campfire was already extinguished, and there was not a person to be seen. The white-robed lady whom he had saved previously had already disappeared without a trace. Lady? Zhang Xian yelled. He was just about to go out to look for the ladder when he caught sight of a line of neatly written words on the stone wall not too far away. You have saved me once, and I have returned the favor. Thus, we are even now. There is still a long time ahead of us, so may we meet again in the future. Meet again in the future? Zhang Xian was dumbstruck. She left? Chapter 652, Consonant Spirit Realm Pinnacle. Seeing the words left on the wall, Zhang Xian felt disappointed. This was the First Lady that had sent his heart beating, but they ended up parting so quickly. He didn't even manage to get the other party's name. Zhang Xian raised his hand and wiped away the words on the wall before walking out of the cave. The vast sky appeared before him, but there wasn't a single person in sight. It seemed like the other party had already left long ago. After searching around the perimeter and realizing that the other party was gone, he began calculating the time based on his surroundings, and the result left his head shaking. I was actually out for 3 days? He didn't expect to have been out for 3 whole days. The perfect consonance of soul and body has raised my Jinchi cultivation to Consonant Spirit Realm Pinnacle. Previously, Zhang Xian's breakthroughs were dependent on completing the corresponding Heaven's Path Divine Art. But this time, just by fainting once, not only did his soul and body merge together flawlessly, his Jinchi cultivation even made a huge leap. From clarifying Turbidity Realm Pinnacle, he advanced all the way to Consonant Spirit Realm Pinnacle. That was an entire cultivation realm. However, considering that the main goal of Consonant Spirit Realm was to harmonize one's soul and body together, as well as to nourish one's soul, that was to be expected. The very concept of his soul being flawlessly consonant with his body was aligned with that of the Heaven's Path Divine Art. As such, he naturally achieved a breakthrough with this. Jinchi gushed through his body at rapid speed, nourishing his entire body and revitalizing his spirit. A normal Consonant Spirit Realm cultivator would wield a might of 3,200,000 ding, but my strength has reached 4,000,000 ding! Closing his eyes, Zhang Xian immersed his consciousness into his dantian. With the perfect consonance of soul and body, he could look inwardly to clearly see how much might he wielded at the moment even without testing it out. With a might of 4,000,000 ding in Consonant Spirit Realm Pinnacle, he could rival a Cosmos Bridge Realm Primary Stage cultivator with just his Jinchi strength. If the 2,000,000 ding from his physical body and 3,200,000 ding from his soul cultivation were to be added into the equation, that would total up to a staggering 9,200,000 ding. Even a transcendent mortal 7-dan perfect harmonization realm intermediate stage cultivator might be killed with a single punch from him. Perfect harmonization realm primary stage 8,000,000 ding, intermediate stage 9,000,000 ding, advanced stage 10,000,000 ding, pinnacle 11,000,000 ding. But of course, perfect harmonization realm involves harmonizing everything into a singularity. One's Jinchi, soul, and physical body would be enhanced significantly. At the same time, one would also achieve astounding mastery over one's control over the environment, thus granting one sharp instincts against danger. It wouldn't be easy at all to injure an expert of this caliber. Take for example Zhang Xian's fight with Princess Feyre. Even though he wielded the advantage in terms of strength, he still had to make use of the Library of Heaven's Path to defeat her. A difference in cultivation realm meant a significant difference in speed, reflexes, and preciseness in movements as well. All of these advantages couldn't be made up for with mere strength. While Zhang Xian's strength might be superior to even perfect harmonization realm intermediate stage cultivator, his actual fighting prowess would allow him to draw with a perfect harmonization realm primary stage cultivator only. But beneath that, none would be a match for the current Zhang Xian. Even if a bunch of Cosmos Bridge Realm Pinnacle cultivators were to come charging at him, he would still be able to eradicate them easily. After reaching Consonant Spirit Realm, my Master Teacher rank can be considered to have reached half 5-star. Zhang Xian's cultivation had always been the greatest impediment to his progress as a Master Teacher. Now that he had raised his cultivation, he could be considered as a half 5-star Master Teacher just like Luo Xian and the others. 3 days have already passed, I wonder if they're still here. Given that their schedule was tight, it was hard to tell whether Hong Shi and the others were still in Huanyu capital. Under normal circumstances, as soon as the cultivation at the Cleansing Lake was over, they would have to head to Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy. However, given that the Cleansing Lake had broken down, there was no point remaining here. Thus, it was possible that they might have headed off first. It was a long distance to Hongyuan Empire. If they didn't make haste, they might fail to make it in time for the start of the opening ceremony, and this could spell the disqualification of their candidature. The Master Teacher Academy would accept a bunch of freshmen in the 2nd month and 8th month of each year. Their group was rushing in order to join the 2nd month's batch, and it was already the 1st month now. They didn't have much time left. I should return. Knowing that he didn't have much time left, Zhang Xian took in a deep breath and prepared to fly back to Huanyu capital to check if Heng Shi and the others had left already or not. However, flurried footsteps sounded at that moment, and a few human silhouettes came into sight. Xingyuan, Princess Fei, and the others? Why are they here? Zhang Xian immediately leaped silently onto a huge tree, and gazing downward, he was taken aback. The people he saw were none other than Yu Fei, Xingyuan, Luo Qiqi, Wu Jin, and Yi Qian. Luo Qiqi stood at the very forefront, and she had a map in her hands. She seemed to be looking for something while others were following behind her with grim expressions. The group of 5 was in a rather unkempt state. All of them had clear injuries over them which indicated that they had just undergone a bitter fight. Qiqi, how much further? Anxiety could be seen on Yu Fei's face. Luo Qiqi confirmed the terrain and the surroundings and replied, "Based on the map, it should be somewhere here." "Good. We should quicken our pace. Even though I've stopped those fellows with my formation plate for the time being, given their strength, they could overcome it any time and come rushing in," Yu Fei said. "Indeed." Xingyuan nodded as he subconsciously glanced behind warily. It seemed that the matter which had happened previously had left him fearful. It's truly weird. Spirit beasts usually operate alone, so why are the spirit beasts here cooperating with one another? They were all prowling the area frenziedly in groups, as though trying to find something. Wu Jin found the situation they were in unbelievable. I also find it weird as well. The 2 great land spirit beasts, Grand Lion Spirit Beast and Armored Bear Tiger, are usually the nemeses of one another. Yet, they actually collaborated with one another and attacked in unison as though they were old buddies. And that Dracoego beast as well. When did an aerial spirit beast become so intimate with land spirit beasts? Xingyuan added in bewilderment. Since the cleansing lake couldn't be used anymore, they recuperated in the capital for nearly 3 days before entering the Verdant Mountain to complete the mission the Academy had assigned to them. However, before they could even reach their destination, they stumbled upon a group of frenzied spirit beasts. Possessing a might of transcendent mortal 5 Dan, every single one of those beasts were incredibly powerful. To make things worse, they were even working with one another, hunting down every human that they saw. Under their frenzied onslaught, Luo Qiqi and the rest of the group nearly lost their lives. If not for the many defensive artifacts that Yu Fei possessed, they surely wouldn't have been able to get away. Yi Qian, didn't you say that the Verdant Mountain is very safe? You call this safe? Recalling that huge bunch of spirit beasts pursuing them and the desperate situation they were in, Yu Fei found herself bubbling with rage. Other than that darn Zhang Xian, when had she suffered such injustice? Cold sweat appeared on Yi Qian's forehead. With a tearful face, he replied, "The spirit beasts are usually tame and don't attack humans. I have no idea what's going on either." He also found himself incapable of comprehending the situation before him. This wasn't the first time he had been in Verdant Mountain, and he knew a fair bit of the spirit beasts here. Under normal circumstances, these fellows rarely attacked humans. Yet, today, they were all collaborating with one another to strike down all of the humans they saw. One must know that before coming here, he had reassured them confidently that the Verdant Mountain was completely safe. Yet, for last few hours, they had been chased by the many spirit beasts around the entire mountain, and they felt so exhausted that they could spew blood. Just the thought of them left him stifled. "All right, you need not explain any more. If those fellows come once more, you will block them by yourself." Yu Fei waved her hands. Yi Qian's lips twitched. If he, a consonant spirit realm cultivator, were to stand against that rampaging horde single-handedly, he would probably die in the very first wave of attacks. After a moment of hesitation, Yi Qian said, "Why don't I have my father dispatch some troops over to drive away the spirit beasts?" Huanyu capital wasn't too far away, and as long as they wanted to, they could have the army up here to save them. Dozens of transcendent mortal 5-dan spirit beasts might be fearsome, but they couldn't possibly stand against an entire army of cultivators. Don't you know that this is a mission from the Academy? To dispatch troops here, are you that intent to see us fail and return in disgrace? Yufei harumphed coldly. This? Yi Qian scratched his head. The other party was right. The mission they were on was confidential and couldn't be made known to anyone. If others were to learn of it, failure to accomplish the mission would be the least of their worries. They might even be expelled for failing to maintain confidentiality. All right, let's stop talking about such useless stuff. Let's hurry up and find the entrance to the underground chamber. As long as we enter the underground chamber, we should be safe. Otherwise, I'll throw you to the horde of spirit beasts to let them have a taste for themselves what a crown prince tastes like. Frowning, Yufei waved her hands. Yes. Yi Qian's lips twitched, but he didn't dare to argue back. Thus, he hurried over to Luo Qiqi's side to help her with the navigation. He might be the crown prince of Huanyu Empire, but there was nothing he could do before this obstinate princess. After looking around, he pointed forward and said, It seems like our destination isn't too far away. The entrance should be behind that hill. Good, let's hurry then. The group immediately rushed forward to the coordinates denoted on the map. Right after they left, Zhang Xian's figure appeared from his hiding spot. They must be trying to finish some kind of mission. He had heard that Yufei's group had come to Huanyu Empire to accomplish some kind of mission for the Master Teacher Academy, but to think that their destination would be Verdant Mountain. Judging from their words, they must have met with those spirit beasts. Zhang Xian scratched his head. To save that white-robed lady, he offended more than 30 spirit beasts at once. Perhaps out of anger, those spirit beasts attacked all of the humans that came into their territories, and Luo Qiqi and the others just became a victim of their wrath. If they are still in the surroundings, it would be best for me not to leave via flight. Otherwise, they might notice me. Perhaps it was due to the difficulty of finding the exact position of their destination through the lush crown of the trees, but it was fortunate that Luo Qiqi and the others didn't ride an aerial spirit beast over as well. Of the 30 spirit beasts, there were some that specialized in aerial battle. Had they chosen to ride on an aerial spirit beast, they would have been noticed and surrounded immediately, thus putting them in a very vulnerable position. If they were surrounded on the ground, they would at least be able to retaliate and possibly escape. But in the air, the only fate awaiting them would be descending to their graves. This will be troublesome. Similarly, Zhang Xian wouldn't want to be surrounded by those spirit beasts in midair as well. Even though his cultivation had soared by a fair bit, and he no longer feared those spirit beasts, he would still like to avoid a fight if possible. Chapter 653, Attracting Spirit Beasts. I guess I'll walk to the capital. Jumping down from the branch, Zhang Xian confirmed his direction before walking over. The other party might be on a mission, but this had nothing to do with him. The most important matter for him at the moment was to liaise with Hong Shi and the others and return to Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy rather than waste his time here. Walala! After taking a few steps, Zhang Xian heard some heavy footsteps. He immediately leaped up and hid in the tree. Following which, he saw a few large spirit beasts sniffing off the ground before rushing in the direction where Luo Qiqi and the others disappeared to. They found them. Zhang Xian frowned. Even though these spirit beasts were only at Transcendent Mortal 5-dan, other than Yi Qian, Luo Qiqi and the others were all 6-dan experts, it would still be a difficult battle to fight against them. I guess I should still offer them some help. Thinking so, Zhang Xian followed behind the spirit beasts. No matter what, he was acquainted with Princess Feier and the others, and Luo Qiqi was his apothecary student as well. He couldn't just stand idly by the side knowing that they were in danger. Roar! Roar! Damn it, they're here again! Yi Qian, you're up! A ruckus sounded ahead of him, and following which, a violent ripple of energy spread from the forest. They've started fighting. Knowing that there was no time to lose, Zhang Xian immediately rushed forward, only to hear a sharp gust of wind blowing above him. Raising his head, he saw a massive Draco-Eagle beast swooping down to grab him. It was the same one that had been amongst the beasts surrounding the white-robed lady back then. As Zhang Xian had been hiding within the lush crown of the trees while concealing his aura, he hadn't been noticed by the spirit beasts yet. However, as soon as he drove his Jinqi and charged forward, they immediately noticed his presence. Having met its mortal enemy, the Draco-Eagle beast's eyes reddened in wrath. Its steel talons sliced through the air, producing a sharp screeching sound that seemed as though it would tear through even metal. If I get entangled with it, it'll become hard for me to escape later on. Knowing that if he were to waste time on this fellow, the other spirit beasts would soon gather around him, and it would be hard for him to leave then, Zhang Xian clenched his jaws. Moo! The Draco-Eagle beast possessed the dragon bloodline as well, so the mysterious beast language that he learned previously should be effective on it as well. Through practice, he had realized that its effects were less significant on those that didn't possess the dragon bloodline. As this was the only spirit beast that possessed the dragon bloodline back then, he knew that he would be slaughtered by the other spirit beasts once he expends all of his Jinqi on the beast language. It had insane Jinqi consumption after all. Thus, the only viable course of action back then was to escape. And as expected, after the shout, the Draco-Eagle beast suddenly froze in fear, and it began plummeting from the sky. Putong! The spirit beast with a wingspan of 10 meters fell heavily to the ground, creating a cloud of dust in the air as it twitched uncontrollably. Roar! After dealing with this huge fellow, Zhang Xian was just about to leave when he heard a roaring sound. The armored bear tiger from before leaped up, and swinging its claws, a sharp force came falling onto him. The commotion from before had attracted the attention of the spirit beasts. As the fastest spirit beast in the area, this fellow immediately rushed over to help. This will be troublesome. The other party had its eyes fixed on him as though he had killed the other party's parents. Knowing that a battle wasn't avoidable anymore, Zhang Xian shook his head. Since you want a battle you will get. It just happened that my cultivation has raised by a fair bit, so I guess I'll just try it out on you. Zhang Xian thrust his palm forward with astounding might, creating a powerful shock wave that immediately covered a distance of dozens of meters to strike the armored bear tiger. Voila! He hadn't used his soul energy in this attack, but even so, with the strength of his physical body and Jinqi harness behind it, the might of the attack exceeded 6 million ding. This was far beyond the tolerable limit for the armored bear tiger. The force from its claws was immediately dissipated, and its body was pressed down firmly against the ground. Roar! The armored bear tiger widened its eyes in shock, as though it had seen a ghost. Just 3 days ago, it fought with this fellow, and while the other party's swordsmanship was exquisite, he was still far lacking in strength to stand against it. How could it possibly gain the strength to overwhelm him completely with just a single palm in just a few days? This was, way too exaggerated. If it had known that the other party was so formidable, it wouldn't have dared to prowl around in search of him. Instead, it would have certainly made sure to hide well so as to stay out of the other party's way. Don't you dare pursue me anymore. Otherwise, I'll start spilling blood. A roar, and the Draco-Eagle beast plummeted to the ground. A palm, and the armored bear tiger lost its fighting will. Harumphing coldly, Zhang Xian flung his sleeves and turned around to assist Luo Qiqi and the others. However, at this moment, the group of spirit beasts consisting of the Grand Lion spirit beasts and a few others who were further in front turned around and encircled Zhang Xian. Most probably, the Draco-Eagle beast had called for them before engaging Zhang Xian in a fight. Since you came knocking on your own accord, don't blame me if you were to get injured. Initially, Zhang Xian had no plans of going after these spirit beasts. But since they had come over to challenge him, there was no reason for him to hold back at all. Leaping lightly off the tree, Zhang Xian dashed forward. Heaven's Path Movement Art. Along with the growth of his physical body and cultivation, Zhang Xian's control over Heaven's Path Movement Art was getting more and more adept, and his maximum speed had increased as well. In an instant, it was as if he had torn a hole through space and leaped through it, appearing right before the Grand Lion spirit beast in an instant and knocking it down with his body. You specialize in defense? Fine, I'll use brute strength to crush the defensive ability you are so proud of. Pun! As the two came into collision, the Grand Lion Spirit Beast suddenly found its massive body flying backwards swiftly, crashing through dozens of trees in the course of his movement, leaving him lightheaded from the impact. After sending this huge fellow flying, Zhang Xian twisted his body and charged toward a wolf-like spirit beast. Pai Pa! The sheer might of Zhang Xian's fist compressed even air itself. Unable to dodge the attack, the wolf-like spirit beast could only take it forcefully. However, its defense didn't even last for an instant before it was crushed into the ground, subdued. While an intense battle was going on here, Luo Qiqi and the others were dumbfounded. It was just a moment ago that the group of spirit beasts had caught up to them and was readying to launch an attack. Furious, Yu Fei pushed Yi Qian forward to take the brunt of the attack. Given Yi Qian's consonant spirit realm cultivation, even if he were to survive this ordeal, he would surely end up lying on the bed for months afterward. Who could have known that, before anything could happen, those furious spirit beasts would suddenly back down? Could it be that they are aware of my identity as the Crown Prince, so they dared not lay their hands on me? Yi Qian scratched his head in embarrassment. But that was impossible. When had the savage spirit beasts ever considered a person's social standing before ripping him apart? Even an emperor would be no exception to this rule. Someone has attracted the attention of the spirit beasts in our place. Look, there's a battle going on there. With a frown on her face, Yu Fei was the first one to figure out the situation. All of the retreating spirit beasts had headed in the same direction, and a violent disturbance in the spiritual energy could be felt from that direction as well. Adding the frenzied roars in that direction, it was clear that a battle was ongoing. Yi Qian, could it be one of your men? Xing Yuan frowned. Their mission had to be carried out in absolute secrecy. As such, they had strictly told Yi Qian that he was not to allow anyone to follow them. In order to ensure that, they even chose to walk on foot instead of riding on an aerial spirit beast. Given that someone had lured the spirit beasts away as soon as they had met with danger, they found it hard to believe that it wasn't the doing of Yi Qian's men. It isn't me. I didn't allow anyone to follow me. Yi Qian quickly waved his hands to explain himself. He knew how important the mission was, so how could he make such a serious mistake? We'll know once we get there. Luo Qiqi waved her hands. On! Xing Yuan nodded. Nothing can be allowed to go wrong with our mission. If we really were followed, we will be in deep trouble. With this, the group silently advanced toward the direction where the battle was ongoing. A moment later, they arrived at the scene, and with just a single glance, they all froze. It's Zhang Shi. Why would teacher be here? Wasn't this fellow taken away by his teacher? How could he appear here? Seeing that it was a familiar face, different expressions surfaced on their own faces. The one who was delighted was naturally Luo Qiqi, whereas the one who despaired was Princess Yu Fei. She had lost a wager with Zhang Xian, so meeting him and having the bet enforced was the last thing she would want to see happening. I know! Teacher must have seen that we were getting attacked, so he intentionally attracted that bunch of spirit beasts over to him. Luo Qiqi suddenly said. You're overthinking the matter. When has he ever been so kind? Yu Fei harumphed. If that wasn't the case, why would the aggression of these spirit beasts suddenly turn from us to him? Given how frenzied they were, it was unlikely that they would have changed target if not for Zhang Laoshi intentionally drawing their attention. Luo Qiqi said. This? Everyone was stunned. Luo Qiqi's words made perfect sense. It was just a moment ago that all of the spirit beasts looked as though they would devour them whole. As such, they thought that a bitter fight awaited them. Yet, in the blink of an eye, they abandoned them and turned their hostility toward Zhang Shi instead. It was a little hard to believe that Zhang Shi hadn't done anything to draw their aggression given such circumstances. Regardless of whether he intentionally drew their attention or not, look at their battle. Wu Jin interrupted the thoughts of the crowd, and pointed to the battle with a shaking finger. Hearing those words, everyone immediately turned their gazes over. Almost instantly, their pupils dilated in shock, and their mouths went dry. Wasn't he still at clarifying turbidity realm pinnacle a few days ago? Xing Yuan gulped down his saliva. Just 3 days ago, when they were entering the cleansing lake, the other party was still at clarifying turbidity realm pinnacle. How could he possibly be at consonant spirit realm pinnacle at this very instant? They had seen geniuses who improved swiftly, but this was completely inconceivable. More importantly, even though he had reached consonant spirit realm, their cultivation was still higher than him. Yet, despite fighting with so many spirit beasts that even they would feel threatened before, he was able to subdue them with ease as though an adult playing with a child. Wasn't his fighting prowess a little way too strong? Princess Euphea widened her eyes in shock, and her face twitched violently. She never thought that this shameless figure would actually possess such astounding strength. If the other party had displayed such astounding prowess in their previous battle as well, she would probably have been defeated in a single move. If that was the case, did he do it intentionally? That must be it. Recalling how the other party kicked her bottom, her face flushed from rage. If it wasn't intentional, how could his attacks so coincidentally land on her bottom each time? He could have subdued her easily, but he chose to kick her bottom instead. A ruffian he was indeed. Shameless. Unaware of everyone's thoughts, Yi Qian asked. Senior, since Zhang Shi is so formidable, and he could already be considered as a member of the academy as well, is it possible for us to bring him on the mission with us? With him, I feel that we'll be in a much safer position. Bring teacher along with us? Luo Qiqi's eyes gleamed in excitement. Indeed! With him, the success rate of our mission would be boosted significantly. Your words do make sense. I approve of this matter. After a moment of contemplation, Xing Yuan nodded in agreement. No, he can't go with us. Euphea's eyes widened at that suggestion, and she quickly shot it down. Chapter 654, Wu Yangzi. He can't go with us? Luo Qiqi frowned as she turned to look at her close friend. Why? This mission was fraught with danger. Given teacher's wisdom and superior cultivation, he would be able to aid them out of difficult situations. Why would her good friend turn down such a good idea? He is lecherous! Euphea exclaimed with gritted teeth. Lecherous? You're overthinking it, he has no interest in you at all. Luo Qiqi shook her head at her good friend's words. She had confidence in this aspect. Putting everything aside, Luo Qiqi's appearance was top-notch as well, comparable to Princess Euphea. Yet, despite her beauty and her respect for Zhang Shi, the other party never even spared her a glance. Given how obstinate you are, that's even more impossible. Euphea staggered backward as her vision darkened. What do you mean by this? No interest in me? I'm not that bad, all right? Why does it sound as though I was turned down by the other party? As an esteemed princess, I should be the one turning others down. Qiqi is right. Zhang Shi has high standards. He has a student known as Wang Ying who is much prettier than you. I've seen her myself, but he has no interest in her whatsoever. Given that, it's unlikely for him to be interested in you either. Xing Yuan nodded in agreement. Given his fondness for Euphea, he felt threatened by Zhang Xian's capability and the intricate relationship between the duo. Thus, he had his men investigate the latter's background. Not only did Zhang Shi have a student who was even more beautiful than Euphea, he had also had many pursuers in the past, but he still remained unmoved by any of them. Euphea might be beautiful, but her temper was simply horrendous. Even Xing Yuan could only barely tolerate it himself. For others, it was probably completely out of question. What did you say? Luo. The sound of teeth gritting against one another sounded as Euphea glared at Xing Yuan with widened eyes while emanating blatant killing intent. Xing Yuan, why don't you try repeating what you have just said? A cold shiver ran through Xing Yuan. Seeing that Xing Yuan was frightened into such a state, Wu Jin chuckled lightly beneath his hand. However, a cold glare from Euphea immediately removed any hilarity he saw in this matter. What are you laughing for? Are you dying for another beating? Wu Jin trembled. I'm just watching the commotion, there's no need to involve me in your affairs, right? All right, enough. I'll invite teacher later on, and Fair, you'd better don't talk at all. I fear that teacher might try to enforce the bet or command you to serve him if you get on his bad side. Seeing the group falling into an argument before the entrance to the underground chamber had even been found, Luo Qiqi shook her head. Upon hearing the words enforce the bet, Princess Fair suddenly recalled the matter of her being a maid, and this immediately silenced her. By the time the argument among them halted, Zhang Xian was already done cleaning up the spirit beasts. The 30 or so spirit beasts were lying on the floor, moaning in agony. This time, the beast hunters didn't come along. However, even if they did, the same fate probably would have awaited them. Seeing Zhang Xian clap his hands and preparing to leave after clearing up the spirit beasts, Luo Qiqi yelled and walked over. Teacher! Little Qi! Zhang Xian smiled. In truth, he had noticed the group as soon as they arrived. Since he had come to save them, there was nothing for him to hide. Walking up to Zhang Xian, Luo Qiqi bowed deeply and said, Teacher, I have an insolent request that I need to ask of you. I wish to invite teacher to participate in a mission from the academy. Luo Qiqi began explaining the matter. Mission? Zhang Xian waved his hands. I'll pass on the matter. I still need to meet up with Hong Shi and the others, and head for Hong Yuan Master Teacher Academy. Hearing Zhang Xian's words, Luo Qiqi was taken aback for a moment before replying. Hong Shi? They have already left. Left? Zhang Xian frowned. How could they leave without the champion of the Master Teacher Tournament? Indeed. In order to make it in time for the opening ceremony, they took a flying ship of the Huanyu Empire royalty along with the others. Before leaving, Hong Shi consulted Pavilion Master Mo on your matter, and it was only with his agreement that they decided to leave. Luo Qiqi replied. Flying ship? Zhang Xian asked doubtfully. It's a military transportation device found only within empires. It is driven by dozens of spirit beasts, and the ship can house up to 1,000 people. Seeing that her apothecary teacher hadn't even heard of such a thing before, Luo Qiqi looked at him in bewilderment. There was no master teacher in the empire who didn't know about flying ships. Given how knowledgeable he was and how formidable his teacher was, how could he have never heard of flying ships before? Zhang Xian nodded. Truthfully, he had been thinking that given how far an empire's territory stretched, if a war were to happen, wouldn't it take years just to deploy troops, needless to say, send reinforcements in? It turned out that there was a transportation device for this very purpose. To use dozens of aerial spirit beasts to ferry 1,000 people at once. Probably only the royalty of an empire would possess the wealth and resources to do so. Right, Hong Shi took teacher's students along with him as well. He said that there's no need to worry about you since you were with Yang Shi, and it would be best for them to wait for you at Hong Yuan Empire. Luo Qiqi continued filling Zhang Xian in on the details. Hearing those words, Zhang Xian smiled bitterly. He didn't expect so many things to happen in the 3 days that he was out. Everyone thought that given how formidable Yang Shi was, he would be completely safe together with him. They probably never could have imagined that the seemingly omnipotent Yang Shi in their mind was actually just a hoax, a fictional character. Forget it! Zhang Xian shook his head. He was still worried about his students and Sun Chang since Hong Shi had left, but since Hong Shi had taken them along with him, they should be fine. All he had to do was to appear at Hong Yuan Master Teacher Academy when the time comes. Since there was nothing tying him down now, Zhang Xian became curious about the mission Luo Qiqi spoke of. So, what kind of mission are you all on? Zhang Xian asked. It's... Luo Qiqi hesitated for a moment before switching to telepathic message. It's the underground chamber of 6-star blacksmith Wu Yangzi. 6-star blacksmith? Zhang Xian's eyebrows shot up. Wu Yangzi is an extremely famous grandmaster blacksmith from 3,000 years ago, and he possesses blacksmithing skills unmatched by any. He is known as Hong Yuan Empire's #1 blacksmith in the past 10,000 years. In fact, even the royal seal currently used was crafted by his hands. Luo Qiqi explained. If he is a Grand Master blacksmith of Hong Yuan Empire, Why would his underground chamber be located here? Zhang Xian asked doubtfully. Hongyuan Empire was at least several million kilometers away from here. Why would a Grand Master blacksmith travel so far out here? This? Luo Qiqi scratched her head awkwardly and said, He was kidnapped. Kidnapped? For a 6-star master teacher, whose cultivation had reached saint rank, to be kidnapped, are you for real? Besides, standing behind every single blacksmith was the entire blacksmith guild. It was one of the strongest occupation alliance even when considering the entire continent. To dare to lay their hands on one of their esteemed members, who could be so arrogant? Given how formidable his blacksmithing skills are, it is believed that someone captured him to have him forge weapons for them. Due to this matter, the Master Teacher Pavilion and Blacksmith Guild sent many experts out to search through the entire Hongyuan Empire, but they were still unable to find him, Luo Qiqi said. However, in the last few months, while I was reading through some ancient texts, I found some clues about the incident back then. You? Zhang Xian was perplexed. Given how so many experts in the Master Teacher Pavilion and Blacksmith Guild failed to find anything at all, how could she, a mere 5-star primary master teacher and grade 2 student of Hongyuan Master Teacher Academy, possibly find any clues? More importantly, there was an interval of several thousand years in between. Actually, it's all just a deduction on my part. On top of forging pills, I have an interest in smithing as well, and Grandmaster Wu Yangzi has always been a person I deeply respected. I even once tried to learn his zither forging technique, but due to his incomplete heritage, I was only able to learn a small portion of it. Luo Qiqi explained. I did some research on the matter, and I realized that there were actually some weapons in Huanyu Empire that were created using such a forging technique. Perplexed, I did some investigation, and in the midst of doing so, I chanced upon a map to an underground chamber. That was why I applied for this mission with the Academy. But of course, it's still too early to tell whether it leads to Grand Master Wu Yangzi's underground chamber or not. Zhang Xian nodded. To actually notice some clues based on how a weapon was forged, it seemed like Luo Qiqi was a truly tenacious person. But thinking about it, if not for her tenacity, how could she, a talented grade 2 genius and a transcendent mortal 6th-dan pinnacle cultivator, possibly acknowledge him as her teacher without any hesitation? Even though teacher hasn't reported to the Master Teacher Academy yet, you can already be considered as a member of the Academy already. Thus, you're qualified to participate in this mission as well. Furthermore, the purpose of this mission is just to find whether the underground chamber exists, and whether it is related to Wu Yangzi. There is not much danger involved in it. As long as we succeed, we'll obtain 2 academic credits, and this will surely prove to be useful to teacher in the future. Luo Qiqi smiled. Academic credits? Zhang Xian was baffled by those words. As the librarian of a high school in his previous life, he had heard of this term before. Was there something like that in the Master Teacher Academy as well? Academic credits are something unique to Master Teacher Academies. It's said to be a system enforced by Kong Shi personally. It serves as a judging criterion, and students can use it to purchase better cultivation resources, lessons for higher-ranked master teachers, or even a currency for purchasing anything at all. Without these, students will find themselves unable to make any progress within the academy. In fact, one could say that the most valuable items in the Master Teacher Academy aren't spirit stones or tutelage jade tokens but academic credits, Luo Qiqi explained. As master teachers, those in the Master Teacher Academy had no lack of tutelage jade tokens and spirit stones, and thus, such resources had lower value there. Is there an academic credit criterion to graduation? Zhang Xian asked with a bizarre expression. Of course not. Academic credits are just a currency used among students, they aren't a fundamental criterion for graduation. How can one possibly be barred from graduation just because they don't have sufficient academic credits? Luo Qiqi replied in exclamation. Only then did Zhang Xian heave a sigh of relief. Taking the model from high schools in his previous life, he thought that academic credits would be a necessary requirement for graduation, but it seemed like the only thing alike was its name. In essence, they were two completely different items. Teacher, do you want to come with us? If this is the underground chamber where Grandmaster Wu Yangzi was locked in, there's a high chance that his heritage will be inside, Luo Qiqi said. Heritage? Zhang Xian was taken aback for a moment before his eyes lit up. I heard that blacksmiths specialize in training their bodies. Suppose that he really left his heritage there, is it possible that there will be a physical body cultivation technique within it? Even though Zhang Xian's body and soul were in perfect consonance already, his body was still slightly weaker than his soul. If his soul were to grow larger than 10 meters once again, the same incompatibility issue would crop up once more. Zhang Xian couldn't possibly abandon his soul cultivation, so it would be best if he could find some physical body cultivation technique to train his body. Given that blacksmiths spent their days with flames, ores, and metals, their body had to be exceptionally resilient. Thus, they usually possessed a unique physical body cultivation technique. Chapter 655, Formation Destroying Silver Needle. Not expecting to hear such a question, a bizarre expression appeared on Luo Qiqi's face as she replied, There should be. Not only is Grandmaster Wu Yangzi a blacksmith, he's also an expert at tempering his physical body. All right, I'll go then. Chuckling lightly, Zhang Xian nodded in agreement. A high requirement for one's physical resilience, and might stood in the way of those who sought the path of a blacksmith. Without sufficient strength, one would be unable to forge the best of weapons. Thus, every master blacksmith that had ever existed was an expert at tempering their physical body. It would be much better for Zhang Xian to obtain the cultivation technique of a 6-star blacksmith than to search through the entire Huanyu Empire for other physical body cultivation techniques. Great! Hearing her teacher agree to join them on this exploration, Luo Qiqi was filled with excitement. Even though it hadn't been long since she had met this apothecary teacher of hers, the other party gave her the feeling of an unfathomable person. Somehow, she felt that they would be much safer were he to accompany them. Having come to an agreement, Luo Qiqi beckoned the others over, and Princess Fei and the others walked up to the duo. I did lose the bet at the cleansing lake, but don't you dare use it to blackmail me. As soon as Princess Fei walked up to Zhang Xian, she immediately gritted her teeth and said, I'll prepare the spirit stones, but I'll only be able to repay you when we arrive at Hongyuan Empire. Given that something abrupt occurred in the cleansing lake, and neither of us completed the conditions of the bet, why don't we just call it a draw? Seeing how the other party accepted the results of the bet candidly, Zhang Xian chuckled lightly. He was the one who collapsed the entire cleansing lake. While he did make some compensation to Huanyu Empire, he still felt a little embarrassed by the matter. After all, the farce did occur due to his carelessness. Since something abrupt occurred before any of them could finish the bet, naturally, there wasn't a winner or a loser. A draw? Princess Fei was taken aback. She'd thought that the other party would grasp onto this to force her to serve as his maid or taunt her, leaving her in a difficult and embarrassed position. Who knew that he would offer a truce instead? Could he really be that generous? That's right. But of course, if you're not content with the results, we could always have another bet, Zhang Xian continued. Princess Fei's mouth twitched, and she hurriedly shook her head. There's no need for it. It was just a moment ago that she thought the other party was generous when he uttered such kind words. But now it seemed like everything he said was a mere facade. Have another bet? You must be taking me for a fool. After losing so tragically twice, if I were to continue betting with you, it would just be a matter of time before I'm completely broke. What about you all? Are any of you interested in betting against me for Princess Fei's sake? Seeing how the lady paled upon hearing his words, Zhang Xian shook his head and turned his gaze to Xing Yuan and the others. Honestly, these bets were truly too good a source of income to miss. After all, even though he might have quite a few spirit stones at hand for the moment, considering the immense spiritual energy consumption for the Heaven's Path divine art, it probably wouldn't be too long before his wealth dried up. We'll pass. Xing Yuan and the others flinched upon seeing Zhang Xian's sight on them. Betting against you is like betting on a rigged game. No matter how foolish I am, I can't possibly bet on something that I can't win in. Sigh, I don't even get a chance to lose it all. Seeing that no one dared to bet against him, Zhang Xian shook his head in disappointment. Are these truly geniuses from the Master Teacher Academy? To dare not engage in a bet against him, weren't they a little too cowardly? If the others were to learn of his thoughts, tears would definitely start streaming down their faces. We aren't the ones who are weak, it's you who is monstrously strong, alright? The previous head of the mystical treasure hall devoted decades to the deciphering of the stone pillars only to meet with little success, and you completed what he couldn't within seconds. The other master teachers took days to absorb the spiritual energy from the lake eye, but you actually took in almost everything within minutes. Who would possibly be so bored as to challenge you in an impossible bet? Let's hurry to the underground chamber. Knowing that Zhang Xian had a formidable teacher whom even Pavilion Master Mo was deferential to, not to mention, he himself possessed exceptional strength as well, Xing Yuan and the others didn't dare to view him as an ordinary freshman. Instead, they thought of him as a fellow peer. The next matter they had at hand was to find the entrance to the underground chamber. They swiftly introduced themselves before scaling across the mountain before them and walking into a vast valley. Luo Qiqi came to a stop. Based on the descriptions in the map, the underground chamber should be located here. Here? Xing Yuan and the others glanced at one another in confusion. This valley wasn't too huge, and it looked perfectly ordinary on the outside. Surrounding them were trees and plants, and the chirps from birds echoed harmoniously in the area, creating an exceptionally lively scenery. However, after searching around, they couldn't find any entrance that could possibly lead to an underground chamber. Could the news have been false, or did they get the wrong location? This is the very valley where the weapon forged using the zither forging technique was found by a beast hunter 3,000 years ago. Through my investigation, it seems that 6 other weapons forged using the same technique originated from this location as well. Corroborating these with my other intelligence, I'm certain that there's an underground chamber here, Luo Qiqi said confidently. However, the spiritual energy in the air is exceptionally stable, and there isn't the slightest disturbance to be felt. It doesn't seem like there's a formation here, though? Xing Yuan and the others frowned. If the entrance to the underground chamber wasn't plain to their eyes, it could only mean that it was hidden beneath a formation. However, given the lack of disturbance in the spiritual energy in the surroundings, it was impossible for there to be a formation here. Let me take a look. I'm a 5-star formation master, so I should be able to find the formation and decipher it if there's one. Princess Feyre stepped forward. Their group didn't come together just based on their degree of intimacy. Their expertise also complemented the flaws of one another. One would require 5 5-star supporting occupations to qualify as a 5-star master teacher, and Princess Feyre happened to be a 5-star formation master as well. On! Everyone nodded. Princess Feyre flicked her wrist and took out a compass. Following which, she circled around the valley, searching around with every step she took. A moment later, she abruptly came to a halt. Flicking her wrist, she took out a sharp needle reminiscent of a spear. It was hard to tell what it was forged on by its outer appearance, but there was a unique inscription on it which emanated a cold gleam. Noticing the doubtful gazes from Yi Qian and the others, Luo Qiqi explained what it was. This is a formation-destroying silver needle. Formation-destroying silver needle? There are some high-grade formations that absorb spiritual energy from the environment and hide themselves within their environment, thus making them extremely difficult to detect. Thus, such a tool is required to make their true forms appear. There are special formation inscriptions on it that can send the spiritual energy harnessed within a formation into disarray, forcing it to reveal itself. Luo Qiqi explained. Only then did everyone understand the situation and nod their heads. Zhang Xian also nodded too as he examined the needle with a peculiar gaze. He had read about formation-destroying silver needles in the books from the Formation Master Guild before, and it was written inside that they had the ability to dispel formations. Zhang Xian thought that such a tool would only be seen in higher-tier Formation Master Guilds, but to think that Princess Feyre would have one with her as well. It seemed like they did come prepared. After drawing the formation-destroying silver needle, Princess Feyre didn't rush into action. Instead, she walked around with the compass in hand and even bent down to pinch the soil before and pluck a few blades of wild grass. High-grade formations could change their weak point depending on the geography of the location. If one couldn't find the crux of the formation, nothing one did would be able to sway the formation. It was just like how if one wanted to sink the boat, one had to open up a hole in the crucial regions. Otherwise, even if one were to crack open a gaping hole in the deck, it wouldn't do anything at all. Step back. After taking a look, Feyre seemed to have found something, and she turned around and waved her hands to gesture for the others to step back. Knowing how dangerous the formation could be, Luo Qiqi and the others retreated to outside the valley without saying anything. After the group stepped out of the valley, a deep frown appeared on Princess Feyre's face. All of a sudden, her disposition changed into that of a valiant warrior on the battlefield. Who? With a flick of her wrist, she threw the formation destroying Silver Needle out, and it fell onto a region not too far away from her. Following which, she formed a few seals with her hands before tapping on the needle forcefully. 1. The Silver Needle began to spin. As it spun, the formation inscriptions on the surface of the Silver Needle seemed to have turned into a vortex of spiritual energy, drawing in the spiritual energy in the surroundings into its center. Eventually, it formed a massive pillar of spiritual energy that extended to the heavens. The formation-destroying Silver Needle can draw spiritual energy from the surroundings and cause a huge spiritual energy disturbance, thus forcing even the greatest of formation to show its marks, Luo Qiqi explained. Zhang Xian nodded. Formations were sustained by spiritual energy, and if the spiritual energy in the surroundings was sapped dry, it would lose its balance, thus revealing its form. It was the same logic as how the rocks at the bottom of the river would be revealed as the current ran dry. The collapsing of the formation at the cleansing lake was also due to its balance being destroyed. Hoo! As the rotation of the Silver Needle hastened, more and more spiritual energy was drawn from the surrounding. At the same time, a thick layer of sweat cloaked Princess Feyre's forehead. Open! With a slight buzz, the surroundings of the Silver Needle abruptly distorted. A slight mist came into appearance. Indeed, there's a formation here! Upon seeing the mist, everyone's eyes lit up. The mist was the sign of the presence of a formation. This meant that Luo Qiqi's deduction was accurate, and it was highly likely there was an underground chamber here. Whoa! The rotation of the Silver Needle quickened even more, but Princess Feyre was already wearied. Given how this formation was able to remain hidden so many years without being noticed, there was no doubt that it was a high-grade formation. Even a 5-star formation master like her was finding it difficult to break open the formation. Who? Exhaling a mouthful of turbid air, Princess Feyre halted the formation destroying Silver Needle before falling to the floor weakly. Exhausted, she couldn't even care about her own appearance at this moment. How is it? Seeing her state, Luo Qiqi immediately rushed up and fed her a pill to recover her vitality. Only then did her pale complexion finally recover slightly. After resting for a moment, Princess Feyre stood up and shook her head. There's a grade 6 formation here. Due to my limited cultivation, I'm unable to force it to show itself. She had put her entire strength into the previous attempt, but she was only able to force out hints of the formation. Her current strength was still a little too low to force it out entirely. If even you are unable to force out the formation, how can we enter the underground chamber? Luo Qiqi frowned. If they couldn't even force the formation to appear, naturally, they wouldn't be able to decipher it either, let alone enter the underground chamber. They had come here probably to accomplish a mission, but who knew that they would be stopped right at the doorstep? If they were to return like that, they would surely become a laughingstock. I don't know either. Princess Feyre shook her head. She thought that with her capability as a 5-star formation master, even if she couldn't decipher the formation, it shouldn't be too hard for her to force the formation to show its form. Who knew that she would end in failure? She couldn't help but feel disappointed. Gritting her teeth, Princess Feyre said, Allow me to rest for a moment first. I'll give it a try after I've recuperated fully. However, at that moment, A nonchalant voice suddenly sounded. This won't work. Turning around, she saw Zhang Xian walking up to her. You know formation deciphering too? Seeing that he was the one who spoke, Princess Fair harumphed. Since you said that this won't work, why don't you share your wisdom with us and tell us what incredible plan you have in mind? I dare not say my plan is incredible, but since there's a formation here, all we have to do is to decipher it, right? Why must we go through an additional step to force it to show itself? Zhang Xian replied. Since the purpose was to find the entrance of the formation, they could just decipher the formation straight. Why go through the additional step of forcing it out? Princess Fair flung her sleeves and harumphed coldly. You're proposing for us to decipher the formation directly? Humph, do you even know the slightest thing about formations? Chapter 656 Underground Chamber. If a formation didn't show its form, could one tell whether it's a confinement formation, slaughter formation, illusory formation, or beguilement formation? It was just like fighting an unidentifiable spirit beast. If one couldn't even see its form and identify its flaws, how did one intend to kill it? You must be kidding. Those who knew the slightest thing about formations wouldn't utter such amateurish words. The way of formation is deep and profound, and it has a long heritage behind of it. It's one of the top occupations throughout the entire continent, paling little in comparison to even master teacher. Such profound knowledge, and all you can say is to decipher it? You sure know how to speak rubbish! Princess Fair harumphed coldly. This was her chance to get back at the other party for the previous 2 humiliations. Her eyebrows shot up, and she spoke majestically. This valley might not be too big, but it is more than 100 mu, 6 hectares. Furthermore, there are a few thousand different flora and fauna in here. As for the geography, it is located within a mountain range and is connected to a forest and a lake. Its east is faced with Yan, whereas its west is faced with Yin. In other words, it's a blessed land suited for setting up all kinds of formations. Just speaking of grade 6 formations, there are 14,372 types that could be set up here. Each of them also has innumerable different variations. Unless the formation is dragged into sight and analyzed, it's impossible to tell which it is. If one doesn't know the formation's type, variation, area, and strength. Let me ask you, how could one decipher the formation? Flinging her sleeves, Princess Fair harumphed coldly. Xing Yuan and the others nodded in agreement. While Yu Fair could be obstinate at times, and she was extremely emotionally charged in her actions, she did possess incredible talent in formations. She was a famous formation master genius even within the Master Teacher Academy. This was also the main reason why Luo Qiqi invited the other party along after receiving the mission. Not expecting her good friend to put down her teacher, Luo Qiqi frowned. Enough, Fair, even if teacher doesn't know much about formation, you can still explain the situation to him calmly. There's no need to use such a tone with him. Her teacher might be a rare genius in pill forging, even a 6-star apothecary would pale before him, but in the field of formations, he did seem to be a little lacking. However, this was to be expected. After all, it was impossible for one to be proficient in everything. Unfazed by the other party's rant, Zhang Xian continued making his point. You're just making things pointlessly complicated. Formations are created by placing formation flags in alignment with the environment. As long as we find the formation flags, it should be easy to stop the formation. Formations are indeed created by formation flags, but do you know how many combinations of formation flags there are? Even if one were to know where the flags are located, one must remove it in a strict sequential order. Or else, it could possibly bring about a backlash from the formation, causing everyone here to die. Hearing the nonsensical words that the other party was spouting, Yu Fair's face reddened in anger. What the heck was this? If she knew how ignorant this fellow was in the way of formations, she would have challenged him to a duel on that back then. Cough cough. Teacher, formations cannot be broken that easily, not to mention, this kind of hidden formation. It is impossible to find the formation flag under such circumstances. Luo Qiqi's face also reddened as she quickly explained the situation to the other party. However, before she could finish her words, the young man before her scratched his head and stomped on the ground. So, a formation flag popped up and fell into his hands. Holding onto it, Zhang Xian turned to look at the group with a sheepish expression. This should be the formation flag, right? It doesn't seem to be as troublesome as you all make it out to be. Ah? Everyone was stunned. In that instant, they looked as though they had seen a ghost. It was just a moment ago that they thought the other party was just an ignorant oaf who was trying to show off. However, upon seeing this sight, their eyes were about to pop out from their sockets. This was especially so for Yufei. Was this for real? She had spent so much effort on trying to force out the formation that she was completely drained at this very moment. Yet she could just barely see a slight hint of the formation. Yet that fellow, with just a casual step, actually took out a formation flag. What was with this huge disparity? This does seem to be the formation flag. Luo Qiqi gulped down her saliva. This formation flag looked ancient, and it had suffered significant wear and tear from the trial of time. With just a glance, anyone could tell that it had been buried underground for a very long time. The chances were that it had originated from the formation that appeared earlier. Fei, look! Luo Qiqi exclaimed. Suppressing her shock, Princess Fei said, Look at what? Even if he coincidentally found one formation flag, it would be futile if he can't remove the remaining ones sequentially. If a grade 6 formation could be torn down that easily, 6-star formation masters wouldn't have such a prestigious standing. So what if you found one formation flag by coincidence? Formations like this have at least 100 formation flags scattered all around. You might have altered the structure of the formation by extracting one of them, but you are a long way off from destroying it. In fact, a careless mistake might even cause the entire formation to explode. The accumulation of spiritual energy of a formation that had been operated for several millenniums was frightening. If it were to explode, the consequences would be as dire as what happened in the cleansing lake. Even a transcendent mortal 8-dan expert could be blown to bits in an instant. Formations weren't a joke. If it could be dispelled so easily, why would 6-star formation masters waste so much effort learning the art? The more she thought about it, the angrier she felt. Princess Fei was just about to lecture the other party when she felt someone pulling on her arm. Shifting her gaze, she realized that it was her close friend, Luo Qiqi. Perplexed, she frowned. What's wrong? Don't say anything else, just look over there. Luo Qiqi's face was pale in shock. Look over there? Princess Fei turned her gaze over, and the sight that stood before her left her face twitching uncontrollably. She nearly fainted on the spot. Unknowingly, the young man who she thought was still standing beside her was already 20 meters away. While walking, he would bend down from time to time to pluck out a formation flag, just like a farmer pulling out onions from his field. As though to further exaggerate things, he was even whistling leisurely. Wee huh. Her eyes rolled up. Princess Fei was on the verge of tears. Do you really need to be so exaggerated? That's a formation that I failed to force out despite using the entirety of my strength, and yet there you are, plucking out its flags one after another casually. When dealing with hidden formations, even the greatest formation masters would use the formation-destroying silver needle to force it out first before analyzing its type based on the spiritual energy it exuded before deducing the location of its life gate. Yet this ignorant fellow simply jumped past all those steps and began plucking out the flags. Have we gone crazy? Of course, if it was just plucking out formation flags, most people could do it. But, you don't know the slightest thing about formations, and the flags were also hidden as well, so how could you do it so confidently and leisurely? To even begin whistling on top of that. Are you that confident that there would be no backlash? It was truly fortunate that she didn't bet with him earlier, otherwise she would be deeper in debt at this very moment. It seems like teacher does know the location of every single formation flag, as well as the sequence so as to prevent any backlash. Luo Qiqi felt her throat turning dry. Based on her teacher's words previously, she thought that he didn't know anything about formations at all. Only now did she realize that she was gravely mistaken, The other party was in truth a master at formations. Even Princess Fair, a 5-star formation master, was far from a match for him. In fact, she didn't think that even the formation masters who expertise in deciphering formation could do it the way he did. I mean, look at that: precise footsteps, leisurely posture, bored gaze, and relaxed whistling. The hell? Tell us the truth, are you the one who set up this formation? Otherwise, how could you be so familiar with it? He actually broke the formation just like that. Xingyuan, Wu Jin, and Yi Qian also rubbed their eyes in disbelief as they glanced at one another in astonishment. Hidden formations were one of the hardest types of formation to decipher. If one couldn't force it out, it would be impossible to decipher it. Yet to be plucking out the formation flags while whistling so leisurely. They had never seen such an unbelievable sight in their life before. Why did it feel as though they were dreaming? I'm done! Amidst everyone's dumbstruck gazes, the young man flicked his wrist and put the pile of formation flags into his storage ring. After which, he clapped away the dust from his hands before turning to look at the group. Even though the formation flags were already worn out, he could still set up a grade 6 formation with it. Not to mention, it was also an antique, so it would probably fetch a hefty price in an auction. The group hurriedly scanned the surrounding, and they noticed a clear change in the previously empty valley. A massive gate, 6 meters tall, appeared right before their eyes. It was hard to tell what metal it was forged with, but it was full of aged marks that indicated more than a millennium of history behind it. Beyond the gate was a flight of stairs that headed deep into the underground. From the spot they were standing at, it seemed to lead into an abyss. It's indeed that underground chamber! Upon seeing the gate, everyone's eyes lit up in excitement. This proved that Luo Qiqi's deduction was accurate. While the evidence that Luo Qiqi provided was credible, and the odds were in their favor, if not, the Academy wouldn't have offered them this mission for academic credits after cross-checking the evidence. They still couldn't hold back their agitation at having found a concrete lead on Grandmaster Wu Yangzi. Let's enter! Xingyuan's eyes were gleaming with excitement. Wait a moment first. It's hard to tell how long it's been since the underground chamber was last opened, so there might be all kinds of poisonous fumes inside. Luo Qiqi stepped forward to stop him. Flicking her wrist, she took out a jade bottle. This is an antidote that I forged specially for this occasion. It can neutralize up to 1,000 types of poisonous fumes found in underground chambers. After which, she opened the jade bottle, and round pills rolled out. Given the lack of ventilation within a typical underground chamber, rotting corpses, insects, and natural-produced gases were among many factors that could lead to poisonous fumes in it. Thus, Luo Qiqi specially prepared pills to deal with this. Otherwise, even a Cosmos Bridge realm expert might fall under the venomous onslaught. Knowing that this was a matter involving their safety, everyone took a pill and swallowed it without protesting. Zhang Xian was no exception either. He took a pill and swallowed it too. After swallowing the medicine, Luo Qiqi turned to Wu Jin and said, Wu Jin, since you specialize in mechanisms, we'll be depending on you later on. Among the group, Wu Jin was a proficient celestial designer, and he possessed extensive knowledge over the various kinds of mechanisms and traps. Given that they were stepping into uncharted territory, there was no guarantee that there would be no defensive mechanisms to fend off intruders. Leave it to me! Flicking his wrist, Wu Jin took out an artifact reminiscent of an umbrella. It was a tool that celestial designers used specially for deciphering mechanisms, a 1,000 utility umbrella. Let's go! Opening the 1,000 utility umbrella, Wu Jin led the way in. Without any hesitation, the rest of the group followed along as well. Seeing that they were prepared, Zhang Xian also followed behind Luo Qiqi. Darkness immediately overwhelmed them as soon as they stepped through the gate, rendering them blind. Xingyuan stepped forward, flicked his wrist, and a few night illumination pearls immediately rolled down the stairs, providing illumination for the group. For the time being, the sound of pearls rolling down was still echoing ceaselessly throughout the chamber, indicating the deep depth of the underground chamber. Scanning the surroundings and confirming that everyone was safe, Wuzhen said. Let's proceed then. Before leading the way forward, you're tuning into the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.